Know your place. Those 3 words, snarled in broad daylight at Riverside Park, came seconds before Police Chief Gordon Harlan's hand cracked across Dr. Renee Caldwell's face hard enough to split her lip. Blood trickled down her chin as 50 witnesses froze. Then Harlan did something worse than the violence. He smiled at the gathering crowd and lied. She attacked me. I had to defend myself. His voice carried that practiced authority of a man who'd never been questioned, never been stopped. The park fell silent except for one sound, the quiet buzz of a dozen phones recording everything. What Harlan didn't know in that moment would cost him everything. The random black woman he'd just brutalized wasn't random at all. She was the state's top court administrator, the single official with the power to dismantle the very system protecting him. He'd just struck the hand that controlled the scales of justice. Now, I invite you to follow my story to the very end. Like and comment what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story has traveled. The morning had started with such ordinary beauty that Renee Caldwell almost felt guilty for finding peace in it. She'd arrived at Riverside Park just after 7, when the June sun still hung low enough to paint everything gold. The bench she chose sat beneath an old oak whose branches formed a natural canopy, offering shade and the gentle whisper of leaves that always helped her think. In her lap rested a thick folder, case files, judicial conduct reports, and the kind of documentation that never made headlines but shaped lives nonetheless. At 58, Renee had learned to steal these quiet hours before the chaos of her office consumed her day. As the chief administrator of the state court system, her responsibilities stretched across every courthouse, every judge, every case that moved through the machinery of justice. It was power most people didn't understand because it operated in silence, assigning cases, reviewing judicial conduct, coordinating with oversight boards, ensuring the system's gears turned smoothly even when individual parts tried to jam them. This morning, she was reviewing materials related to a police shooting case scheduled for preliminary hearings. The file troubled her. Witness statements didn't align with the official police report. Evidence had been collected late. The investigating officers all worked under the same command structure as the shooter. She'd seen this pattern before. Not corruption exactly, but a kind of institutional self-protection that bent investigations just enough to ensure the desired outcome. Dr. Caldwell? She looked up. A young mother pushing a stroller had stopped nearby, recognition lighting her face. "I thought that was you," the woman continued, smiling warmly. "You spoke at my law school graduation 3 years ago. Your speech about justice being a verb, not a noun. I still think about that." Renee returned the smile, feeling that familiar warmth that came from knowing her words had landed somewhere meaningful. "That's kind to say. Are you practicing now?" "Public defender's office. It's everything you said it would be, exhausting and essential." The woman glanced at her sleeping baby. "Taking a sanity break before court." "The best lawyers know when to step back and breathe," Renee said. "Keep fighting the good fight." As the young attorney continued her walk, Renee felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. She'd mentored dozens of young lawyers over the years, watched them enter the system with fire and idealism. Some kept that flame burning. Others learned to bank it, to survive by not pushing too hard against walls that didn't move. The trick, she'd discovered, was knowing which walls were truly immovable and which just looked that way because nobody had pushed hard enough. The park filled gradually as morning progressed. Joggers traced the perimeter path. A Tai Chi class gathered near the fountain, their synchronized movements creating patterns in the air. Dog walkers congregated at the designated area, their animals playing while humans traded gossip and coffee. It was quintessentially Riverside, a city of 150,000 that prided itself on being progressive, diverse, and community-minded, even as it struggled with the same tensions that fractured cities everywhere. Renee checked her watch. 8:15. She had another 45 minutes before she needed to head to the courthouse. Enough time to finish reviewing the shooting case and draft her preliminary recommendations. The investigating detective's report bothered her most. Detective Marcus Webb had 22 years on the force and a reputation for thoroughness, yet this investigation felt cursory. Witness interviews were brief. The canvass for additional witnesses seemed incomplete. Physical evidence was documented but not rigorously analyzed. It read like a man going through motions, checking boxes without actually seeking truth. She made a note to request the case be assigned to a judge known for asking hard questions. Judge Patricia Morrison had a background in civil rights law and zero tolerance for sloppy police work. If there were holes in this investigation, Morrison would find them. "Excuse me." The voice came from her left, male, carrying an edge that made Renee's instincts prickle. She looked up to find a white man in his mid-50s standing 3 feet away. He wore casual clothes, polo shirt, khakis, expensive running shoes, but carried himself with rigid authority. His face was flushed, jaw tight, eyes hard. "Yes?" Renee kept her voice neutral, professional. "You need to move." He didn't frame it as a request. Renee glanced around. The park had dozens of empty benches. The nearest occupied seat was 30 yards away. "I'm sorry?" "This bench. I need it. You need to move." Something cold slid through Renee's chest. She'd lived 58 years as a black woman in America. She knew this tone, this stance, this particular flavor of aggression that wore a thin veneer of civility. This wasn't about the bench. "There are plenty of other benches available," she said calmly. "I'll be here another half hour or so, then it's all yours." His face darkened. "Did you not hear me? I said move. Now." A jogger slowed nearby, sensing trouble. The Tai Chi class had gone still, participants watching without breaking formation. Renee felt the weight of attention gathering like a physical thing. "Sir, I don't know what this is about, but I'm not moving. I have every right to be here." She kept her voice level, refusing to match his aggression. "Rights?" He barked out a laugh that held no humor. "You people always talking about rights. Let me tell you about rights. This is a public park in a civilized city. When someone tells you to move, you move. Know your place." The words landed like stones. Know your place. Renee felt something ignite in her chest. Not anger exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity. She'd spent her entire career navigating spaces where she wasn't supposed to be, proving herself over and over, choosing battles carefully, maintaining dignity in the face of disrespect that ranged from subtle to blatant. She'd developed armor, learned when to fight and when to let things slide. This, she knew instantly, was not a moment to slide. "My place," she said quietly, "is exactly where I'm sitting." The man's face contorted. For a second, Renee thought he might just walk away, embarrassed by the scene he'd created. Then his hand moved, fast, vicious, practiced, and connected with her face in a slap that snapped her head sideways and filled her mouth with the copper taste of blood. The park seemed to gasp. Renee's folders spilled from her lap, paper scattering across the grass. Her hand went to her face, feeling the heat already blooming across her cheek, the split in her lip where his ring had caught flesh. The pain was sharp but distant. What consumed her awareness was the absolute silence that had fallen across the park. 50, maybe 60 people had gone completely still. Even the dogs had stopped barking. The man, and Renee suddenly knew exactly who he was, had seen his face in newspapers and official meetings. Police Chief Gordon Harlan looked at the frozen crowd, and his expression shifted into something practiced, almost theatrical. "Did you all see that?" His voice carried across the park, pitched for maximum effect. "This woman attacked me. She came at me aggressively shouting, making threats. I had to defend myself." Renee stared at him, stunned not by the lie's audacity, but by its smooth delivery. This was a man who'd told lies before and watched them become truth through sheer authority. "That's not," someone started to say, but Harlan cut them off. "I need everyone to stay calm. This woman is clearly unstable. I'm going to need witness statements from everyone who saw her aggressive behavior." He pulled out his phone, thumb moving across the screen. "I'm calling this in. Park security and my officers will be here shortly to take statements." Renee's mind raced through possibilities with the speed of decades spent navigating complex systems. She could argue, could demand her own account be heard, could invoke her position and watch this escalate into a different kind of spectacle. Or she could do what every survival instinct screamed at her to do: get out before this got worse. She bent slowly, gathering her scattered papers with hands that trembled despite her best efforts to control them. Blood dripped from her lip onto a judicial conduct report, the red drops spreading across dense text about procedural fairness. "Ma'am, you need to stay here." Harlan's voice had shifted back to command mode. "Don't leave the scene." Renee straightened, folder clutched to her chest, and met his eyes. Up close, she could see the calculation there, the absolute certainty that he'd already won this confrontation. That look, the smug assurance of a man who'd never faced real consequences, told her everything she needed to know about how this would play out if she stayed. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. "If you want to arrest me, arrest me. Otherwise, get out of my way." For a moment, she thought he might actually do it, might put hands on her again, might escalate this into something that required ambulances and incident reports. Then his eyes flicked to the crowd, doing some calculation she couldn't read, and he stepped aside. "We have your face on multiple cameras," he called after her. "When we identify you, you'll be charged. Assault on a police officer is a felony." Renee didn't respond. She walked with her back straight, each step measured and deliberate, even as her legs wanted to run. She made it to her car, parked 3 blocks away in a metered lot, before her hands started shaking so badly she couldn't get the key in the ignition. She sat in the driver's seat, air conditioning blasting, and let herself have 60 seconds of pure reaction. Her face throbbed. Blood had soaked through the tissue she'd grabbed from her purse. The folder in her lap was crumpled and stained, and Gordon Harlan, police chief of Riverside, had just committed assault and battery in front of dozens of witnesses, then lied about it with such casual confidence that part of her wanted to admire the performance. The 60 seconds ended. Renee's training reasserted itself. The methodical, analytical thinking that had carried her through law school, through years of climbing a ladder designed to keep people like her off it, through countless moments when emotion would have been justified but strategy was required. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app, switching to selfie mode. The woman looking back at her had a split lip already swelling, a darkening bruise spreading across her left cheek, and blood smeared down her chin. Her eyes were steady despite the trauma visible in her features. Renee took 3 photos from different angles, then a short video where she stated in a calm, clear voice, "My name is Dr. Renee Caldwell. Today is June 15th. It's approximately 8:30 a.m. I was just assaulted in Riverside Park by Police Chief Gordon Harlan. I did not touch him, did not threaten him, did not provoke him in any way. He demanded I move from a public bench, and when I refused, he struck me across the face. He then told witnesses I had attacked him. I am documenting these injuries immediately after the incident." She saved everything to cloud storage, then sent copies to her personal email. Only then did she start the car. The drive to her office took 12 minutes. Renee used them to think through next steps with the clinical precision that made her formidable in her professional life. Going to the police was pointless. Who would she report Harlan to? His own department. The city's civilian complaint process was a joke, a bureaucratic maze designed to exhaust complainants until they gave up. Press attention was a weapon that cut both directions, and Harlan had already established his narrative. No, this required something different, something more strategic. She parked in her reserved spot at the courthouse and made her way through the employee entrance. The security guard, Raymond, who'd worked this post for 15 years, took one look at her face and went pale. "Dr. Caldwell, what happened? Should I call?" "I'm fine, Raymond. Just a minor incident. I'll take care of it." In her office, she locked the door and opened her computer. The state court administrator's database gave her access to information that would make any journalist weep with envy. She pulled up Gordon Harlan's file. Not just his public record, but the internal documents that tracked every complaint, every lawsuit, every settlement that involved city employees. What she found made the assault in the park feel almost inevitable. 17 excessive force complaints over 24 years. 8 formal investigations, all concluding with insufficient evidence or within department guidelines. 4 civil lawsuits settled with taxpayer money and non-disclosure agreements. A pattern of aggressive behavior toward Black residents that was documented but never meaningfully addressed. And a tight network of relationships with the city council, the mayor's office, and the district attorney's office that had protected him every time accountability threatened. Gordon Harlan hadn't slapped her because he'd lost control. He'd done it because he'd learned over 2 decades that he could. Renee's intercom buzzed. "Dr. Caldwell, Judge Morrison is here. She says it's urgent." Renee touched her face gingerly. The swelling had worsened in the past 20 minutes. "Send her in." Judge Patricia Morrison took one look at Renee and closed the office door behind her. "Jesus Christ, what happened?" Patricia Morrison was 62, white, with steel gray hair she wore in a severe bun, and a reputation for being impossible to intimidate. She'd handled death penalty cases, gone head-to-head with corrupt prosecutors, and once held a police chief in contempt for lying under oath in her courtroom. If Renee was going to trust anyone with this, it was her. "Gordon Harlan hit me in Riverside Park this morning," Renee said flatly, in front of approximately 50 witnesses, then claimed I attacked him. Patricia's face went through several expressions: shock, fury, calculation. "Tell me everything." Renee did, leaving nothing out. Patricia listened without interrupting, her expression growing progressively darker. When Renee finished, the judge was silent for a long moment. "You know what this means?" Patricia finally said. "That I can't touch anything related to this case, that I need to recuse myself from any prosecutorial oversight, any judicial assignments, any administrative decisions that could remotely connect to an investigation of Harlan." Renee's voice was steady. "I know the rules, Patricia, which is why I need you to help me follow them perfectly. You're going to go after him. I'm going to make sure the system works the way it's supposed to." Renee pulled up a document on her computer. "There's a provision in the state judicial code for requesting outside prosecutors in cases involving potential conflicts of interest with local law enforcement. I can't make that request myself, but you can. As the senior judge in this district, you have standing to petition the Attorney General's office for a special prosecutor." Patricia leaned forward, reading the statute Renee had pulled up. "This could take months. Harlan's already established his narrative. By the time anything official happens, I'm not relying on anything official." Renee opened her phone and showed Patricia the photos she'd taken. "I'm documenting everything, and I'm going to trust that there were people in that park with cameras." As if summoned by her words, Renee's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced at the screen and felt something shift in her chest. The notification was from a news alert app. The headline read, "Viral Video, Riverside Police Chief Involved in Park Altercation." Renee clicked through. The video had been uploaded to social media 23 minutes ago and already had over 50,000 views. The angle was from about 30 feet away, shot on someone's phone, but the audio was devastatingly clear. Harlan's voice, "You need to move." Her own voice, calm. "There are plenty of other benches available." Harlan again, "You people always talking about rights. Let me tell you about rights. Know your place." Then the slap, audible as a sharp crack, and Renee's head snapping to the side. The video continued, capturing Harlan's performance for the crowd, his false claims, his command for witnesses to stay. The comments section was already exploding. Patricia watched over Renee's shoulder. "Well, that changes things." Renee's office phone rang, then her cell phone, then her intercom. The siege had begun. She looked at Patricia, feeling something settle in her chest that was part determination, part cold fury, and part a kind of peace that came from knowing exactly what she had to do. "I need you to make that petition to the Attorney General today," Renee said. "I need you to request a special prosecutor from outside this jurisdiction with no ties to Riverside law enforcement. I need you to cite concerns about institutional bias and the appearance of impropriety." "Done. What else?" "I need you to take over the preliminary review of that police shooting case I was working on this morning, the one involving Detective Webb's investigation. I'm pulling myself from anything that touches Riverside PD." Patricia nodded slowly. "You think they're connected? The shooting case and Harlan coming after you?" "I think Gordon Harlan saw a black woman sitting alone on a bench in his park and felt entitled to assert dominance. I don't think it was more complicated than that." Renee's voice hardened. "But I also think there's a culture in that department that made him confident he could do it without consequences. The same culture that protects officers in questionable shootings. The same culture that buries complaints and settles lawsuits quietly. This isn't about one bad cop. It's about a system that enables them." The phones kept ringing. Through her office window, Renee could see people gathering in the hallway. Reporters probably, staff definitely, maybe even officials from the mayor's office coming to begin damage control. "You should see a doctor," Patricia said. "Document the injuries officially." "Already planning to." Renee stood, wincing as the movement made her face throb. "But first, I need to make a statement." "Renee," Patricia's voice held warning, "anything you say publicly becomes evidence. If this goes to trial, when this goes to trial, Renee corrected, I want my words on record from day one. Clear, simple, truthful. No ambiguity, no emotion, just facts. She walked to her door and opened it. The hallway fell silent as a dozen faces turned toward her. She recognized most of them: courthouse reporters who covered judicial proceedings, colleagues who'd heard something had happened, and in the back, a young man with a professional video camera who must have come from one of the local news stations. "I'll make one statement," Renee said. "No questions afterward." The camera's red light came on. Phones appeared, recording. Renee took a breath and felt the full weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Not just what had happened, but what would come next. The investigation, the scrutiny, the attempts to discredit her. The machinery of institutional protection grinding into motion. She'd seen it happen to others who challenged powerful men. She knew the playbook by heart. But Gordon Harlan had made one critical miscalculation. He'd hit someone who understood the system better than he did. Someone who had spent 3 decades learning its pressure points and leverage points. Someone who knew exactly how to dismantle protective walls from the inside. "My name is Dr. Renee Caldwell," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I serve as Chief Administrator of the state court system. This morning at approximately 8:20 a.m., I was sitting on a bench in Riverside Park reviewing case files when Police Chief Gordon Harlan approached me and demanded I move. When I declined, Chief Harlan became verbally aggressive, made racially charged comments, and then struck me across the face with enough force to split my lip and cause substantial bruising." She paused, letting that land. Chief Harlan then told witnesses that I had attacked him and that he acted in self-defense. This is categorically false. I did not touch Chief Harlan. I did not threaten him. I did not raise my voice. I simply declined to surrender a public bench that I was lawfully occupying. Another pause. The hallway was absolutely silent. "I have documented my injuries and filed appropriate medical reports. I have reviewed video footage that has been posted online which clearly shows the sequence of events. I will be cooperating fully with any investigation while simultaneously recusing myself from any administrative or judicial decisions that could involve this matter, as is appropriate given my position." Renee met the camera's lens directly. "I want to be clear about something. This is not just about what happened to me this morning. This is about a pattern of behavior by law enforcement officials who believe they operate above accountability. It's about a culture that protects officers who abuse their authority, and it's about a community that deserves better." She touched her swollen face gently. "I spent my career building systems of accountability within our judicial framework. I never imagined I would become a test case for whether those systems actually work. But here we are. So we're going to find out together. Do the protections we've built hold up when the person being protected is a black woman and the person being held accountable is a police chief?" Renee stepped back. "That's all I have to say. Direct further questions to my office." She closed the door on the explosion of voices, the shouted questions, the chaos. Patricia was still sitting in the guest chair, and on her face was an expression Renee had seen before. The look of someone watching the first domino fall in a sequence that would topple structures they'd thought were permanent. "You just declared war," Patricia said quietly. "No," Renee corrected, moving back to her desk. "I just reminded them that the war's been ongoing. They've just gotten comfortable thinking they'd already won." Her phone buzzed with another notification. The video from the park had hit 100,000 views. The Riverside Police Department had issued a statement that she knew without reading would be carefully crafted to sound reasonable while undermining her credibility. This was the beginning, not the end. The machinery was warming up, the defenses organizing, the counterattack being planned. But Renee had something they didn't. She knew the system's blueprints. She'd helped design some of its mechanisms, and she'd spent 30 years learning exactly how much pressure each load-bearing wall could take before it cracked. Gordon Harlan had hit her because he was used to hitting people without consequences. Now he was about to discover what happened when you struck someone who'd spent their entire life learning how to fight back strategically. Outside her window, Riverside went about its day. Traffic flowing, people working, the machinery of ordinary life grinding forward. But beneath that surface, something fundamental had shifted. A woman had been struck. A lie had been told, and the careful balance that kept powerful men protected had just been thrown into question. Renee looked at her reflection in her darkened computer screen. The bruised, bloodied face looking back at her was the face of someone who'd just made a choice that couldn't be unmade. She picked up her phone and called her doctor to schedule an emergency appointment for a full medical documentation of her injuries. Then she called her lawyer, not because she expected to be charged, but because she expected Harlan to try every possible avenue to turn victim into aggressor. Then, finally, she let herself have one more minute of pure feeling before the long game began. Her face hurt, her hands shook, and somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the trauma and the fear and the anger, something else burned. A determination that had been forged over decades of being underestimated, dismissed, and told to know her place. Gordon Harlan had wanted her to know her place. She was about to show him that her place was exactly where the system's foundations met its failures, and that she knew how to make the whole structure accountable. The fight was just beginning, and this time, the woman on the bench wasn't going anywhere. The medical examination took 45 minutes and felt like an eternity. Dr. Sarah Chen had been Renee's physician for 12 years, long enough to know that her patient didn't scare easily and didn't exaggerate. When Renee walked into the office with her face swollen and bloodied, Sarah's professional composure slipped for just a moment. "Jesus, Renee, sit down. Tell me what happened while I examine you." Renee recounted the incident in clinical detail as Sarah photographed the injuries from multiple angles, measured the swelling, documented the split lip and the bruising that had deepened from red to purple. The doctor's movements were gentle but thorough, checking for signs of concussion, testing Renee's vision and balance, palpating the bones of her face to ensure nothing was fractured. "You were lucky," Sarah said finally, though her tone suggested she hated using that word. "The swelling is substantial, but there's no fracture. No serious internal damage. The lip will need a few days to heal. The bruising will get worse before it gets better. Expect it to spread down to your jaw and neck over the next 24 hours. "Can you document all of this officially?" Renee asked. "I need a medical report that could stand up in court." Sarah pulled off her examination gloves and met Renee's eyes. "You're really going to pursue this? Against the police chief?" "I'm really going to let the system do what it's designed to do," Renee corrected, "which means creating an unimpeachable record of what happened." "You know they're going to come after you. They always do." Sarah's voice held the weariness of someone who'd treated too many victims, who became defendants in their own cases. "I've documented domestic violence cases where the woman defended herself and ended up charged with assault. I've seen police reports that turned victims into aggressors with a few carefully chosen words." "I know," Renee said quietly. "But I also know that video doesn't lie, and there are 50 witnesses who saw what really happened. This isn't a he said, she said situation." Sarah began typing her report. "For what it's worth, I hope you destroy him. The number of patients I've treated over the years who had encounters with Riverside PD," she shook her head. "Let's just say you're not the first person to sit in that chair with injuries that didn't match the official story." Those words stayed with Renee as she left the medical office and returned to her car. How many others had there been? How many people had Harlan and his department brutalized, knowing that their badges were shields against accountability? Her phone had been buzzing continuously during the examination. She scrolled through the notifications now, trying to separate signal from noise. The video from the park had gone viral, over 2 million views and climbing. Major news outlets were picking up the story. Her office email had over 300 unread messages. And buried in the avalanche of media requests and concerned messages from colleagues was one that made her pause. It was from an email address she didn't recognize, with a subject line that read, "You're not the first. I can help." Renee almost deleted it. Her spam filter was going to be working overtime for weeks. But something made her open it instead. "Dr. Caldwell, my name is Elena Cruz. I'm an investigative reporter with the Riverside Independent. I've been documenting patterns of misconduct in the RPD for 3 years. I have files on Harlan that would make your skin crawl, complaints that disappeared, evidence that got lost, witnesses who were intimidated into silence. What happened to you this morning isn't an aberration. It's the system working exactly as designed. If you're willing to fight this, I can provide documentation that shows this pattern goes back decades. Please call me." A phone number followed. Renee sat in her car, engine off, weighing the decision. Bringing a reporter into this meant losing control of the narrative's timing. It meant potential complications if the case went to trial. Defense attorneys love to accuse prosecutors of trying cases in the media. But it also meant shining light into corners that had stayed dark, precisely because people like Harlan controlled who got to look. She dialed the number. Elena Cruz answered on the second ring. "Dr. Caldwell? How did you know it was me?" "I've been waiting by my phone since I sent that email 20 minutes ago." Elena's voice was younger than Renee expected, energetic but focused. "Thank you for calling. I know you don't know me, and you have no reason to trust me, but I need you to understand something. I've been trying to expose Gordon Harlan for 3 years, and every door I've knocked on has slammed in my face. City officials won't talk. The DA's office stonewalls. Witnesses recant. Evidence disappears. You going public with what he did to you is the first crack in that wall I've seen." "What do you have?" Renee asked directly. "Everything. 47 excessive force complaints filed against Harlan and officers in his direct command structure over the past 15 years. 18 civil lawsuits, 12 of which were settled with NDAs and taxpayer money. A pattern of targeting Black and Latino residents in low-income neighborhoods where people don't have the resources to fight back. Financial ties between Harlan and 3 city council members who consistently vote down oversight measures. And a case from 2019 that should have ended his career but got buried so deep, I only found it 6 months ago." Renee's professional instincts kicked in. "What case?" "A 17-year-old kid named Marcus Webb. Black, honor student, no record. Harlan pulled him over for a broken taillight and it escalated. Harlan claimed the kid was resisting, used a taser, then beat him badly enough to put him in the hospital for 4 days. The family tried to file charges. Within a week, their lawyer withdrew from the case citing conflicts of interest. The medical records from the hospital mysteriously became incomplete, and the family suddenly had immigration issues even though they'd been citizens for 2 generations. The case evaporated. Something cold settled in Renee's stomach. "Webb. Is he related to Detective Marcus Webb?" There was a pause. "You know him?" "I know of him. He's been with the department over 20 years. Renee's mind raced through implications. "Are you telling me Marcus Webb, the detective, is related to the kid Harlan assaulted?" "His nephew," Elena confirmed. "And here's the thing. Marcus Webb was the lead investigator on at least a dozen cases involving use of force complaints against other officers. Cases that all concluded with insufficient evidence or justified force. I think Harlan has had him under his thumb since 2019, using that kid's assault as leverage. Webb investigates complaints just thoroughly enough to look legitimate, then buries them." Renee thought about the police shooting case she'd been reviewing that morning, the investigation that felt perfunctory and incomplete. Webb's investigation. She'd been planning to assign it to Judge Morrison for rigorous review, but now the whole thing looked different, not just sloppy work, but potentially deliberate misdirection. "I need to see your files," Renee said. "I need to know you're serious about this," Elena countered. "I've burned sources before trusting the wrong people. I've had my apartment broken into, my car vandalized, my editor pressured by advertisers who have city contracts. Harlan has protected himself for decades by making sure anyone who threatens him pays a price. Are you really ready for what comes next?" Renee touched her swollen face gently. "He hit me in broad daylight and lied about it to 50 witnesses. Then I found out he's been doing worse to people who don't have my resources or platform. So yes, Ms. Cruz, I'm serious." "Elena, and we should meet in person, somewhere public, but not too public, somewhere his people won't think to look." They settled on a coffee shop in the college district, far enough from downtown to avoid the courthouse crowd, but busy enough to provide cover. Renee agreed to meet Elena there in 90 minutes, giving her time to handle the most urgent messages piling up in her office. The drive back to the courthouse took her through Riverside's downtown core, and Renee found herself seeing the city differently now. The gleaming government buildings, the well-maintained parks, the banners proclaiming the city's commitment to diversity and inclusion. It all looked like set dressing designed to hide the machinery underneath. How many people had been brutalized behind that progressive facade? How many complaints had been filed and forgotten? How many families had been threatened into silence? Her phone rang. The caller ID showed her daughter's name. "Mom?" Aisha's voice was tight with worry. "I just saw the video. Are you okay? Where are you?" "I'm fine, baby. Heading back to the office." "Fine?" "Mom, you're not fine. That man hit you. In public, on camera." Aisha's voice cracked. "Why aren't you at the police station filing charges? Why aren't you—" Aisha breathed. Renee used the calm, steady tone that had gotten her daughter through everything from childhood nightmares to law school exams. "I know this is scary, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing." "Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're going up against the entire police department alone." "I'm not alone, and I'm not going to do anything reckless." Renee pulled into the courthouse parking lot. "But I'm also not going to let this go. You know that, right? You know I can't." There was a long silence. Then Aisha said quietly, "I know. I just wish you didn't have to be the one to do this." "Someone has to. It might as well be someone who knows how the system works and has the resources to fight." Renee paused. "Your grandmother would have done the same thing." That got a small, sad laugh from Aisha. "Grandma would have hit him back." "Your grandmother grew up in a different time. She fought battles I don't have to fight because of what she went through. This is my turn." They talked for a few more minutes, Aisha extracting promises that Renee would be careful, would keep her updated, would call if things got dangerous. When they hung up, Renee sat in her car for a moment, thinking about her mother, a woman who'd raised 3 children while working as a maid in hotels, who'd faced daily indignities with grace and strength, who'd lived to see her daughter become one of the most powerful administrators in the state court system, but hadn't lived to see this moment. Maybe that was a blessing. Back in her office, the chaos had only intensified. Her assistant, Marcus, a different Marcus, young and efficient and currently looking overwhelmed, met her at the door with a tablet full of messages. "The mayor's office called 4 times. The city attorney wants to schedule a meeting. 3 different TV stations want interviews. The ACLU left a message offering legal support. The police union issued a statement. You're not going to like it. And Judge Morrison said to tell you she's already filed the petition for a special prosecutor." Renee took the tablet and scanned through the police union statement. It was a masterpiece of deflection and character assassination disguised as concern. They expressed sympathy for any injury she'd sustained while noting that Chief Harlan had acted appropriately in a challenging situation. They raised questions about why Dr. Caldwell had been so resistant to a simple request to move. They suggested that the stress of her demanding position might be affecting her judgment. They called for a thorough investigation that would surely reveal the full context of the incident. It was exactly what she'd expected, and it still made her furious. "Draft a response," she told Marcus. "Keep it simple. Dr. Caldwell welcomes a thorough investigation and is confident the evidence will speak for itself. She has recused herself from any administrative decisions related to this matter and will cooperate fully with outside investigators." Nothing else. No emotion, no counterattacks, just professional courtesy. "The mayor wants to meet with you privately." "I bet he does." Renee checked her watch. She had 45 minutes before meeting Elena. "Tell him I'm available tomorrow afternoon, 2 p.m. My office, not his, and I want Judge Morrison present as a witness to whatever is discussed." Marcus typed rapidly. "The city attorney?" "Same answer. Tomorrow, my office, Judge Morrison present. I'm not having any private conversations that can be mischaracterized later." She spent the next half hour returning the most critical calls and emails, carefully documenting every conversation. When she finally left for the coffee shop, she took a route that avoided the main downtown streets, watching her mirrors for any sign she was being followed. Paranoid? Maybe. But Harlan had already shown he was willing to commit violence in broad daylight. She wasn't going to assume he'd suddenly start playing fair. The coffee shop, an independent place called Common Grounds that catered to college students and local artists, was buzzing with afternoon energy. Elena Cruz had claimed a corner table and waved when Renee entered. She was younger than Renee had pictured, probably early 30s, Latina, with sharp eyes that tracked Renee's approach with professional assessment. "Dr. Caldwell." Elena half stood, gesturing to the seat across from her. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee, black." Renee settled into the chair, positioning herself so she could see the entrance. While Elena went to the counter, Renee studied the reporter's setup. a laptop, a thick folder, a digital recorder placed prominently on the table. This was someone who came prepared. Elena returned with coffee and a determined expression. Before we start, I need to know what you want from this. Justice? Revenge? Reform? Because those are three different strategies. Reform, Renee said without hesitation. Harlan is one man. The system that protected him for 2 decades is the real problem. If all that comes from this is Harlan getting fired or prosecuted, that's not enough. The culture that enabled him will just produce another Harlan. Elena smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd just heard exactly what they'd hoped to hear. Good, because I don't just want a story about a bad cop. I want to expose how the entire apparatus works to protect bad cops. She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. This is 3 years of research. Complaint records I got through FOIA requests that the city tried to deny. Settlement agreements I pieced together from court filings. Financial disclosures showing relationships between Harlan and city officials. And interviews with 17 victims who were willing to talk to me off the record but too scared to go public. Renee paged through the materials, her prosecutorial mind automatically organizing the information into categories. Patterns of behavior, institutional protection, financial incentives, witness intimidation. It was devastating evidence, but also frustratingly incomplete. Lots of smoke, but proving fire required witnesses willing to testify and officials willing to act. The Marcus Webb case, Renee said. Tell me more about that. Elena pulled out a specific file. Marcus Webb, the detective, not the kid, joined RPD in 2002. Solid record, good clearance rates, respected by colleagues. His nephew, Marcus Webb Jr., was a senior at Riverside High in 2019. Honor roll, college-bound, never been in trouble. April 12, 2019, at about 9 p.m., Harlan pulled the kid over 3 blocks from his house. She slid across a copy of the initial police report. Harlan claimed the taillight was out and the kid became verbally aggressive, refused commands, reached toward his waistband. Harlan tased him. Kid fell and hit his head on the pavement. Harlan then had to restrain him. Kid ended up with a concussion, 3 broken ribs, a fractured cheekbone, and taser burns. Witnesses? 2 other teenagers in the car who corroborated that the kid never raised his voice, never moved aggressively, was literally crying and begging Harlan to stop hitting him. Both recanted within days, saying they'd been confused about what happened. Renee felt sick. And the detective, the uncle, what did he do? That's where it gets interesting. Elena pulled out another document. Marcus Webb Sr. went to the chief, this was before Harlan got promoted, and demanded a full investigation. He was ready to burn down the department. Then suddenly, he wasn't. He withdrew his support for his sister's lawsuit. He stopped talking about it. And shortly after, he started getting assigned to all the high-profile use of force investigations. They bought him off? No, I think they threatened him or made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Elena leaned forward. Think about it. Marcus Webb is a black detective in a department with serious race issues. He's seen how the system works. Harlan probably told him that he could make the kid's case disappear and protect Webb's career, or he could let it play out and destroy both of them. Webb had a daughter in college, a mortgage, 20 years toward a pension. What would you choose? Renee thought about the shooting investigation Webb had handled, the one that felt deliberately incomplete. So now Harlan uses him to sanitize investigations. Webb goes through the motions, makes it look thorough, but always concludes exactly what the department needs him to conclude. Exactly. And because Webb is black, because he has that good reputation, his investigations carry weight. Who's going to question the integrity of a respected black detective? It's perfect cover. Renee sat back, the full scope of what she was facing settling over her like a weight. This wasn't just about one assault. It was about a comprehensive system of corruption, intimidation, and protection that had been operating for years. Harlan was the visible symbol, but the rot went deeper. I need to talk to Marcus Webb, Renee said. Elena's eyebrows shot up. He won't talk to you. He's buried this for 5 years. Why would he surface now? Because I can offer him something Harlan can't. A way out. Renee's mind was already working through possibilities. If Webb cooperates with a special prosecutor, If he provides evidence about how these investigations have been manipulated, he can turn witness instead of defendant. He doesn't have to keep living under Harlan's thumb. That's assuming he wants out. Some people get so deep into compromise they can't remember what integrity looked like. Then we find out which kind of person he is. Renee pulled out her phone. "Do you have contact information for the nephew, Marcus Webb Jr.?" Elena hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He's a junior at State now, full scholarship, pre-law. I interviewed him 6 months ago, but he wouldn't let me use his name or story. Said it would destroy his uncle's career and his family couldn't handle that. Set up a meeting. Tell him I want to talk about his uncle, not about filing charges. Tell him I'm trying to help, not hurt. And if he says no, then we find another way." Renee gathered the documents Elena had shared. "Can I copy these?" "Keep them. I have backups of everything in 3 different locations." Elena grinned. "I've learned to be paranoid in this job." They talked for another hour, Elena sharing details about other cases, patterns she'd identified, connections between Harlan and various city officials. By the time Renee left, the sun was setting and her head was swimming with information. The drive home took her through neighborhoods she usually just passed through. The east side, where Marcus Webb Jr. had been pulled over, where the houses were smaller and older, where police presence was heavier and more aggressive. She thought about all the people who lived in these streets, who dealt with cops like Harlan regularly, who couldn't afford lawyers or didn't have positions of power to protect them. She thought about how many of them had been hit, harassed, falsely arrested, and silenced. Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. Unknown number. "Dr. Caldwell?" The voice was male, older, careful. "Yes?" "This is Marcus Webb, Detective Marcus Webb. I heard you wanted to talk to my nephew." Renee's heart rate kicked up. "Detective Webb, thank you for calling. I'm not calling to help you." His voice was hard. "I'm calling to tell you to leave my family alone. What happened to you was wrong. Chief Harlan shouldn't have done it. But dragging my nephew into whatever crusade you're planning won't fix anything. It'll just hurt more people." "Is that what you told yourself when you started burying investigations?" Renee kept her voice level. "That you were protecting people?" There was a long silence. When Webb spoke again, his voice had changed, less defensive, more tired. "You don't know what it's like. You don't know the choices people have to make. You're right. I don't know your specific situation, but I know that whatever hold Harlan has over you, it only works if you keep protecting him. The minute you stop, the minute you tell the truth, he loses his leverage. And I lose everything. My job, my pension, maybe my freedom if they decide to prosecute me for obstruction. Or, Renee said carefully, you become a witness for the prosecution and help dismantle a corrupt system. There are protections for whistleblowers, Detective. There are ways to do this that don't destroy you." Another long pause. Then, "My nephew doesn't want to relive what happened to him. He's moved on. He's building a future. How free is that future if he's carrying around what was done to him and watching his uncle slowly suffocate under the weight of protecting the man who did it?" Renee let that sit for a moment. "I'm not trying to hurt your family, Detective Webb. I'm trying to make sure what happened to your nephew, and to me, doesn't keep happening to others." "I can't help you," Webb said, but his voice wavered. "You can't help me yet," Renee corrected, "but when you're ready, my door is open." She gave him her personal cell number and hung up, not sure if she'd just made an ally or an enemy. Inside her house, she poured a glass of wine and stood at her kitchen window, looking out at her quiet street. This was a good neighborhood, a safe neighborhood, the kind of place where police were seen as protectors rather than threats. She'd worked hard to afford this house, this life, this sense of security. But that security was an illusion, she realized. Gordon Harlan had shattered it with one slap, reminding her that no amount of achievement or respectability protected someone who looked like her when power decided to assert itself. Her doorbell rang. Renee froze, wine glass halfway to her lips. It was after 9 p.m. She wasn't expecting anyone. Through the front window, she could see a police cruiser parked at her curb. Her heart hammered as she set down the glass and moved to the door, checking the peephole. 2 uniformed officers stood on her porch, both white, both young, both wearing expressions that were carefully neutral. She opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "Yes? Dr. Caldwell?" The taller officer spoke. I'm Officer Brooks. This is Officer Haynes. We need to ask you some questions about the incident in Riverside Park this morning. I've already given a statement. We understand that, ma'am, but there are some inconsistencies we need to clear up. If you could come down to the station. No. Renee kept her voice firm. If you have questions, you can submit them in writing to my attorney. I'm happy to cooperate with any legitimate investigation, but I'm not going anywhere at 9 p.m. without proper notice and representation. Officer Brooks' expression hardened slightly. Ma'am, we're trying to do this the easy way, and I'm exercising my rights. Unless you're arresting me, and if you are, I want to see the warrant. This conversation is over. The officers exchanged a look. Then Haynes said, We're just trying to get to the truth, Dr. Caldwell. The truth is on video and witnessed by 50 people. If Chief Harlan wants to send officers to intimidate me at my home after dark, you can tell him it's not going to work. She closed the door and immediately pulled out her phone, texting Judge Morrison. RPD just came to my house. I attempted intimidation. Documented. Then she called her attorney and recounted the entire exchange while watching through the window as the cruiser finally pulled away. The attorney, Robert Chen, no relation to her doctor, listened grimly. They're testing boundaries, seeing if you'll crack under pressure. Don't engage with any officers without me present. Don't answer questions. Don't let them into your house. Document everything. After hanging up, Renee poured herself another glass of wine and tried to calm her racing heart. This was escalation. Harlan was pushing back, using the department to harass her, trying to flip the script and make her the suspect instead of the victim. It meant she was getting to him. It also meant things were going to get worse before they got better. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Marcus Jr. My uncle said you want to talk. I'll meet you. But not about pressing charges, just talking. Renee stared at the message, feeling something shift. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just determination. But for the first time since Harlan had struck her, she felt like the ground was starting to move in her favor. She texted back, Thank you. Where and when? The response came quickly. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Student Union at State. Come alone. Renee confirmed and set her phone down, her mind already planning the conversation. Marcus Jr. was the key to his uncle. His uncle was the key to the pattern of buried investigations. And that pattern was the key to showing this wasn't about one bad cop, but a systemic failure. Outside, the street was quiet and dark. Somewhere in this city, Gordon Harlan was probably sleeping peacefully, confident that his power and connections would protect him just as they always had. He was about to learn that the woman he'd struck wasn't the kind who stayed quiet, and the system he'd relied on to shield him was about to be held accountable by someone who knew every one of its weak points. The fight was no longer just beginning, it was escalating, and Renee Caldwell was just getting started. The morning brought three things: national media attention, a formal letter from the city attorney's office, and bruises that had spread down Renee's jaw and neck exactly as Dr. Chen had predicted. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, examining the damage with clinical detachment. The swelling had gone down slightly, but the discoloration had intensified, deep purple fading to sickly yellow-green at the edges. Her split lip had scabbed over. She looked like someone who'd been in a fight, which was exactly what the city attorney's letter tried to suggest. The letter, delivered by courier at 6 a.m., was a masterpiece of legal intimidation dressed up as professional courtesy. It expressed concern for her well-being while suggesting she might benefit from stress leave. It raised questions about her ability to perform her duties impartially, given the traumatic incident. It strongly recommended she recuse herself not just from matters involving Riverside PD, but from all law enforcement oversight, pending a full review of her mental state and judgment. Robert Chen had called within minutes of her forwarding him the letter. They're trying to sideline you. If you step back from all law enforcement cases, you're essentially admitting you can't do your job. Which is why I'm not stepping back from anything except the Harlan case and directly related matters, Renee had replied. I've already recused myself appropriately. They don't get to expand that into forcing me out entirely. Now, applying makeup to minimize the worst of the bruising, she prepared for what would likely be the most scrutinized day of her professional life. The meeting with Marcus Jr. wasn't until 3 p.m., but first she had to navigate the mayor's meeting, a scheduled case review that would be watched for any sign of bias or impairment, and the constant media pressure that had turned her office into a siege zone. Her phone rang as she was leaving the house. Elena Cruz. "Have you seen the morning news?" the reporter asked without preamble. "I've been avoiding it." "Don't." Channel 7 did a deep dive into your background. They found the housing discrimination lawsuit from 1995 and are framing you as someone with a history of confrontational behavior toward authority figures. Renee felt a spike of anger. The 1995 lawsuit had been legitimate, a landlord who refused to rent to black tenants and got caught. She'd been part of a class action that resulted in a consent decree and policy changes, but framed the right way, fighting discrimination could be made to look like troublemaking. Of course they did. What else? The police union is holding a press conference at 10. They're bringing in officers who've worked with Harlan to talk about his character and dedication to the community. It's going to be a full-court press to rehabilitate his image. Let them. Every minute they spend defending him is a minute they're not asking why the department sent officers to my house at 9 p.m. to intimidate me. Elena paused. They did what? Renee recounted the previous evening's visit. She could hear Elena typing rapidly in the background. That's harassment. That's witness intimidation. That's good for us, Elena said. I'm going to reach out to those officers for comment. Want to bet they claim it was routine follow-up? I won't take that bet. Renee pulled into the courthouse parking lot. I need to go. Call me after the press conference and let me know what they say. The courthouse felt different today. Conversation stopped when Renee walked through the hallways. Colleagues who normally greeted her warmly offered careful nods or avoided eye contact entirely. She could feel the institution protecting itself. People calculating whether associating with her was a career risk. Judge Morrison was waiting in Renee's office, along with two other judges Renee hadn't expected. Judge Harold Washington, who'd been on the bench for 30 years and had a reputation for fearlessness, and Judge Lisa Martinez, the youngest judge in the district, and known for her aggressive questioning of police testimony. Back up, Morrison said simply when Renee looked at them questioningly. You're going into a meeting with the mayor and city attorney. We're making sure they understand you're not isolated. Renee felt something warm bloom in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank us yet, Washington said. His voice was gravelly from decades of courtroom work. You need to understand what they're going to try. They're going to offer you a deal, probably a settlement, definitely a gag order, possibly a face-saving way to step back from this while claiming victory. They'll make it sound reasonable. They'll make you feel like you'd be selfish to keep fighting. I'm not settling. Good. But hear them out anyway. Know what they're willing to offer. Information is leverage. The mayor arrived precisely at 2 p.m., accompanied by City Attorney David Walsh and, surprisingly, the president of the City Council, Margaret Okonkwo. Renee had worked with all three on various matters over the years. Walsh was competent but politically cautious. Okonkwo was sharp and generally progressive. And Mayor Thomas Brennan was a political weather vane, always positioned to benefit from whatever direction the wind blew. They settled into Renee's conference room, the atmosphere thick with tension. Brennan looked tired, older than his 52 years. Walsh was expressionless. Okonkwo watched Renee with something that might have been sympathy. Dr. Caldwell, Brennan began, thank you for making time to meet. I know this has been a difficult few days for you. Chief Harlan assaulted me 48 hours ago, Renee said evenly. Let's not dance around what we're here to discuss. Walsh cleared his throat. We're here to find a path forward that serves everyone's interests. The video from the park is concerning, but there are also questions about context, about what led to that moment, about whether this situation can be resolved without a protracted legal battle that serves no one. It serves justice, Judge Morrison interjected. Or have we abandoned that principle? No one is abandoning anything, Brennan said quickly. But we have to consider the bigger picture. This city has worked hard to build trust between law enforcement and the community. A scandal involving the police chief? The scandal already exists, Renee cut him off. Gordon Harlan committed a crime in front of witnesses and on video. The question isn't whether there's a scandal. The question is whether this city has the integrity to address it honestly. Okonkwo leaned forward. What do you want, Renee? Specifically. It was a good question, cutting through the political posturing. Renee met her eyes. I want Chief Harlan charged with assault and battery. I want a full investigation into the pattern of misconduct in the RPD. I want the civilian oversight board that's been discussed for 3 years to actually be created with real power, subpoena authority, independent investigators, the ability to recommend charges. And I want Detective Marcus Webb protected if he chooses to cooperate with investigators about how internal affairs investigations have been compromised. Walsh's expression flickered. You're accusing Detective Webb of... I'm saying that if there's been systematic pressure on investigators to reach predetermined conclusions, we need to know about it, and we need to protect people who come forward with that information. You're asking us to tear apart our own police department based on one incident, Brennan said. I'm asking you to do your jobs. Renee's voice hardened. How many settlements has this city paid out in the last decade for police misconduct? How much taxpayer money has gone to silencing victims with NDAs? How many complaints have been filed and buried? This isn't about one incident. It's about whether you have the courage to admit there's a systemic problem. Brennan and Walsh exchanged looks. Then Walsh pulled out a folder. We're prepared to offer a settlement, he said. $250,000, a formal apology from Chief Harlan, and an agreement that you'll step back from any oversight of law enforcement matters for 6 months while we conduct an internal review. No criminal charges? Judge Washington's voice was cold. The investigation is ongoing. If evidence supports charges, the evidence is on video, Martinez interrupted. What more do you need? The DA's office is reviewing, Walsh started. The DA's office works closely with the police on every case, Renee said, which is why Judge Morrison has already petitioned the Attorney General for a special prosecutor, someone without local ties, someone who can't be pressured by political relationships. Brennan's face reddened. You went over our heads? I followed the appropriate protocols for conflicts of interest, the same protocols I'd follow in any case where local prosecutors might be compromised. Renee stood. Gentlemen, Ms. Okonkwo, I appreciate you coming here, but we don't have anything more to discuss. I'm not taking a settlement. I'm not stepping back from my duties. And I'm not letting this get swept under the rug like every other complaint against Gordon Harlan. You're making a mistake, Walsh said. The department will fight this. They'll investigate you. They'll look for any irregularity in your record. They'll make your life hell. They're already doing that. Officers showed up at my home last night to intimidate me. So unless you're here to tell me that's going to stop, we're done. Okonkwo stood as well. For what it's worth, Renee, I believe you. And I'm going to push for that civilian oversight board in the next council meeting. 1 vote out of 7 won't pass it, Brennan said sharply. Maybe not, but it'll be on the record who stood where. Okonkwo headed for the door. Good luck, Dr. Caldwell. You're going to need it. After they left, Renee slumped into her chair. The judges remained, their presence a comfort. That went about as well as expected, Morrison said dryly. They're scared, Washington observed. Offering $250,000 means they know they're exposed. They're trying to buy you off cheap before the real damages start piling up. I don't want their money. I want the system fixed. Martinez smiled. That's why they're scared. Money they can handle. Actual accountability? That's terrifying. The meeting with Marcus Jr. loomed as the afternoon wore on. Renee reviewed everything Elena had given her about the 2019 incident, trying to find the right approach. This wasn't about interrogating a witness. It was about reaching a young man who'd been victimized and was protecting the uncle who'd failed to protect him. She arrived at the State University Student Union 15 minutes early and found a quiet corner in the coffee shop area. Students flowed around her, absorbed in their own dramas and deadlines, blissfully unaware that one of the state's most powerful administrators was sitting among them planning the dismantling of a police department. Marcus Webb Jr. arrived exactly on time. Renee recognized him from a photo Elena had shown her. Tall, lean, with his father's features but his mother's cautious eyes. He wore a State University hoodie and carried himself with the careful neutrality of someone who'd learned not to draw attention. Dr. Caldwell, he didn't sit immediately. Marcus, thank you for meeting me. Please, sit. He settled into the chair across from her, hands folded on the table. My uncle said I shouldn't talk to you, said it would just make things worse. Your uncle is scared. That's understandable. But worse for whom? You? Him? Or the people who'll keep getting hurt if nothing changes? Marcus flinched. What happened to you was wrong. But what happened to me was 5 years ago. I've moved on. Have you? Renee kept her voice gentle. Because Elena told me you're pre-law. You're choosing to work within the justice system. That doesn't sound like someone who's moved on. That sounds like someone who's still fighting, just in a different way. He looked away, jaw working. I want to help people. I want to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to other kids. Then help me do that. Not by reliving your trauma, not by filing charges, just by helping me understand what your uncle is carrying, because I think he wants to do the right thing, but he doesn't see a way out. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. After it happened, after Harlan beat me, my uncle was ready to burn everything down. He was going to the media, calling lawyers, talking about federal civil rights charges. My mom was terrified. She'd seen what happened to other families who went after cops. Broken into, harassed, deported even when they were citizens. What changed? Chief Dixon, he was chief then, before Harlan, called my uncle into his office. Told him he understood his anger, but that pursuing this would destroy my future. Said the department would have to investigate me, would dig into my background, would find anything they could to make me look like a threat. Said colleges would see news stories about me being involved in a violent confrontation with police and wouldn't want to take a chance. Marcus's hands clenched. Then he said if my uncle let it go, they'd make sure I got into any college I wanted. They had connections, could write letters of recommendation, could make sure I got a clean record. They threatened you and offered a bribe in the same conversation. Yeah, and it worked. My uncle backed off, convinced my mom to drop the lawsuit, and suddenly I had these amazing reference letters from city officials I'd never met. I got a full ride here. He gestured around the student union. Everything I have came from that deal, and every day I feel like I sold my soul for a scholarship. Renee reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but offering the connection. You were 17. You didn't sell anything. They extorted your family using your future as leverage. That's on them, not you. My uncle hasn't been the same since. He used to talk about the job like it mattered, like he was making a difference. Now he just goes through the motions, investigates complaints and finds nothing, writes reports that clear officers everyone knows are dirty. Marcus met her eyes. He's dying inside, and I'm the reason. Gordon Harlan is the reason. The system that protected Harlan is the reason. You're the victim in this, Marcus. You and your uncle both. So what do you want from me? To destroy the last bit of integrity my uncle has left by exposing what he's done? I want to give him a chance to get it back. Renee leaned forward. There's going to be an investigation. A real one, with a special prosecutor who doesn't owe anything to the city or the department. When that happens, your uncle can choose to keep protecting Harlan and face potential charges for obstruction, or he can cooperate and help expose how the system really works. If he cooperates, there are protections. Whistleblower status, immunity deals, even witness protection if it comes to that. You're asking him to betray his department. I'm asking him to serve justice instead of corruption. There's a difference. Renee pulled out her phone and showed him the video from the park. This is what Gordon Harlan does when he thinks no one will hold him accountable. Your uncle knows about other cases like this, other victims, other cover-ups. How many more people have to get hurt before someone says enough? Marcus watched the video, his expression hardening. When it ended, he was quiet for a long time. I'll talk to him, he finally said. I can't promise he'll listen, but I'll tell him what you said. That's all I can ask. Renee stood. Marcus, one more thing. When you become a lawyer, when you're the one making decisions about justice and compromise, remember this moment. Remember that the easy path isn't always the right one. He nodded, looking older than his 22 years. I remember every day. After he left, Renee sat alone in the student union, watching students come and go. How many of them had stories like Marcus's? How many had learned to swallow injustice because fighting seemed too dangerous, too costly, too likely to destroy what little they had? Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Police union presser was a disaster. They couldn't explain the video, so they attacked your character. But social media is destroying them. Public opinion is swinging your way. Another text. This one from Judge Morrison. AG's office confirmed they're appointing a special prosecutor. Expect announcement tomorrow. You did it, Renee. But the text that made her heart race came from an unknown number. This is Marcus Webb. My nephew said you wanted to talk. I need to know what kind of protection you're really offering, and I need to know I'm not ending up in prison for doing what you're asking. Renee stepped outside to make the call, finding a quiet spot near the campus quad. Webb answered on the first ring. Detective Webb, thank you for reaching out. I haven't agreed to anything. His voice was tight. I'm just listening. Fair enough. Here's what I can tell you. The Attorney General is appointing a special prosecutor. That prosecutor will have the authority to investigate the Harlan assault and any related misconduct. If you cooperate, if you provide truthful testimony about how internal investigations have been conducted, you can negotiate immunity from prosecution for any obstruction charges. And if Harlan finds out I'm talking to you before that immunity is in place, he'll come after you. He'll try to discredit you, pressure you, maybe threaten you. Which is why any conversations we have need to be documented and protected. Renee paused. But detective, he's already got you trapped. You're investigating cases you know are corrupt. You're writing reports you know are lies. How long can you keep doing that before it destroys you? There was a long silence. Then, I have files, copies of original witness statements that got changed, audio recordings of interviews that disappeared from official records, notes from supervisors telling me what conclusions to reach before I'd even started investigating. I've been keeping them as insurance in case they ever tried to throw me under the bus. Renee's pulse quickened. That's exactly what the special prosecutor needs. And if I hand that over, if I testify, what happens to me? I'm a cop who betrayed cops. My career is over. My colleagues will see me as a rat. I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Or you'll be the man who stood up and told the truth when it mattered most. You'll be the reason other officers who want to do the right thing know they can. You'll be the reason your nephew doesn't have to carry what happened to him alone anymore. She heard Webb's breathing change, could almost feel him wrestling with decades of conditioning that said you never turned on your fellow officers. I need time to think, he said finally. You have time, but not forever. The special prosecutor will be appointed tomorrow. Once that investigation starts, the window for cooperation narrows. Don't wait until you're a target instead of a witness. After hanging up, Renee drove back to her office to find chaos waiting. The afternoon mail had brought a formal notice. The police union was filing a grievance on Harlan's behalf, claiming Renee's public statements had prejudiced any potential investigation and demanding she be removed from her position pending a fitness evaluation. Robert Chen was already in her office, reading the filing with an expression of controlled fury. This is retaliation, he said flatly. Textbook witness intimidation. They're trying to silence you by making you defend your own competence. Let them try. I've been evaluated every year for 3 decades. My record speaks for itself. They'll dig into everything. Old cases, old decisions. They'll try to find anything that looks like bias or poor judgment. Robert set down the papers. You need to prepare for this to get ugly. It's already ugly. They sent officers to my house, they're smearing me in the media, and now they're trying to get me fired. How much uglier can it get? As if in answer, her phone rang. The caller ID showed her daughter's number, but when Renee answered, it was her 9-year-old granddaughter's voice, small and frightened. Grandma? There are police cars outside our house. Mama's talking to them, but she looks scared. They're saying something about you. Renee's blood went cold. Put your mother on the phone, baby. Aisha's voice came on, tense and angry. They're saying they have questions about your fitness to have unsupervised contact with minors. They're implying you might be a danger to Sarah because of mental instability following a traumatic incident. Mom, they're threatening to call CPS. The room seemed to tilt. Renee gripped her desk, forcing herself to stay calm. Put them on the phone. A male voice came on, professionally neutral. Dr. Caldwell, this is Sergeant Mitchell with Riverside PD. We've received a complaint. You've received orders to harass my family. Let me be very clear, Sergeant. I'm currently represented by counsel. Any questions for me go through my attorney, Robert Chen. If you persist in this harassment of my daughter and granddaughter, I will file a federal civil rights lawsuit so fast it'll make your head spin. Are we clear? There was a pause. We're just following up on a complaint. Document who filed that complaint, when it was filed, And on what basis? Because I guarantee you'll need that information when my attorney subpoenas your department's communications. Now leave my family alone." She hung up and immediately called Robert back. "They just went after my daughter and granddaughter. Showed up claiming concerns about my mental fitness around my grandchild." Robert's expression went from angry to coldly furious. "That's over the line. That's so far over the line they can't even see it anymore. I'm filing emergency motions tonight. Restraining order, harassment complaint, everything. They want to play dirty? We'll bury them in legal paper." But as Renee hung up, she felt something shift inside her. Going after her was one thing. She'd signed up for that fight. But threatening her family, frightening her granddaughter, using the specter of Child Protective Services as a weapon, that was different. That was war. Her phone buzzed with another text from Marcus Webb. "I'm in. Tell me what you need." Renee stared at the message, feeling pieces fall into place. Webb's testimony would crack open the department's internal corruption. Elena's documentation would provide the pattern. The special prosecutor would have the independence to pursue it without political pressure. And the public outcry was building to a level that made quiet settlements impossible. Harlan had made his biggest mistake when he decided that escalation would make her back down. Every new harassment, every desperate attempt to discredit her, every overreach just created more evidence of the culture that needed to be dismantled. She texted Webb back, "Get your files somewhere safe. The special prosecutor will be announced tomorrow. I'll make sure they know you're ready to cooperate. And thank you." Then she called Aisha. "How's Sarah?" "Shaken but okay." "Mom, what is happening? Why are they doing this?" "Because they're desperate. Because I'm not backing down and they don't know how to handle that." Renee closed her eyes. "I'm sorry you and Sarah are caught in this. It's not fair." "Nothing about this is fair. You got assaulted and they're treating you like the criminal." Aisha's voice broke. "I'm scared, Mom. I'm scared they're going to hurt you." "They already hurt me. But they didn't break me. And now I'm going to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Renee opened her eyes, looking at her reflection in her darkened computer screen, bruised, tired, but unbroken. "Keep Sarah close. Document everything they do, and trust that this is going to end the right way." After hanging up, she sat in her office as evening deepened outside, thinking about all the people counting on her now. Marcus Jr., trying to build a future from the ashes of his trauma. Marcus Sr., trapped between corruption and conscience. Elena, fighting for years to expose truth. Judge Morrison and the others risking their own standing by supporting her. Her daughter and granddaughter, caught in crossfire they didn't ask for. And all the nameless victims who'd been hurt by Harlan and officers like him, who'd filed complaints that went nowhere, who'd settled lawsuits with NDAs, who'd learned to accept injustice as the price of survival. The weight should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like clarity. She'd spent 30 years working within the system, learning its rules, playing its games, building power carefully and strategically. She'd been patient, diplomatic, willing to compromise when compromise served justice. But Gordon Harlan had shown her something she'd maybe always known, but never fully confronted. Some systems didn't need reform. They needed to be torn down and rebuilt from the ground up. And sometimes the only way to make that happen was to become the battering ram that broke through walls everyone else had learned to live with. Her office phone rang one last time. Unknown number again. "Dr. Caldwell?" A woman's voice, older, hesitant. "My name is Carol Webb. I'm Marcus's mother, Marcus Jr.'s grandmother. My son called me tonight. He told me what you're trying to do." Renee waited, letting the woman find her words. "I want you to know what happened to my grandson broke our family. Not just the beating, but watching my brother destroy himself protecting the man who did it. I told myself we made the right choice, that keeping Marcus Jr. safe was worth the cost. But every day I wonder how many other children got hurt because we stayed quiet." "Mrs. Webb, let me finish. My brother is a good man who made bad choices because bad people gave him no good options. If you can protect him, if you can give him a way out that doesn't destroy what's left of our family, then I'm asking you to do it. But if you're just using him to build your case and planning to throw him away after, then I'm asking you to leave us alone. We've suffered enough." The pain in her voice was raw and real. Renee chose her words carefully. "Mrs. Webb, I can't promise this won't be hard. Your brother will have to testify about things he's ashamed of. He'll be vilified by people who used to be his colleagues, but I can promise that I'll fight for him to be treated as a witness, not a defendant. I'll advocate for immunity and protection, and I'll make sure people understand he was coerced, not corrupt. Why? Why do you care what happens to my family? Because your grandson deserves justice. Because your brother deserves a chance at redemption. And because every family that comes after yours deserves to know that speaking truth to power won't destroy them. Renee paused. Also, because Gordon Harlan hit me and lied about it, and if I let him get away with that, then everything I've built my career on means nothing. Carol Webb was quiet for a moment. Then, my brother will give you what you need. Just, please don't let them destroy him. I'll do everything in my power to protect him. You have my word. After hanging up, Renee finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. The bruises throbbed. Her head ached. Exhaustion pulled at her like a physical force. But underneath all of that was something harder, brighter, sharper. A determination that had been forged in the moment Harlan's hand struck her face and tempered by every attack that followed. They thought they could intimidate her into silence. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Tomorrow, the special prosecutor would be announced. Marcus Webb would turn over his files. Elena would publish her investigation. And the machinery Renee had spent 3 decades learning to operate would be turned against the people who thought they controlled it. The fight was no longer escalating. It was about to explode. The announcement came at 10 a.m. sharp, delivered by the Attorney General herself in a press conference that preempted regular programming on every local station. Renee watched from her office, surrounded by Judges Morrison, Washington, and Martinez, as Attorney General Rebecca Thornton stood at a podium flanked by state flags and spoke with the crisp authority of someone who'd prosecuted organized crime for 2 decades before entering politics. After careful review of the incident involving Police Chief Gordon Harlan and Dr. Renee Caldwell, and in consideration of potential conflicts of interest within the local prosecutorial system, I am appointing Special Prosecutor James Davidson to conduct an independent investigation. Mr. Davidson is a former federal prosecutor with extensive experience in civil rights cases and public corruption. He will have full authority to investigate not only the assault incident, but any related patterns of misconduct within the Riverside Police Department. His findings and any resulting charges will be pursued without political interference or local influence. The camera cut to questions from reporters, but Renee had already stopped listening. James Davidson. She knew that name, knew his reputation. He'd taken down 3 corrupt sheriff's departments in other states, had a conviction rate that made defense attorneys nervous, and was known for being absolutely relentless once he caught the scent of institutional corruption. They just handed us a sledgehammer, Judge Washington said with satisfaction. Morrison was already on her phone, pulling up Davidson's case history. He doesn't do halfway measures. If Webb gives him those files, if Elena's documentation holds up, Davidson won't just go after Harlan. He'll tear apart the entire protective apparatus. Renee's phone exploded with messages. Robert Chen. This is better than we could have hoped for. Elena Cruz. Davidson is a killer. I'm reaching out to him today with my files. And from Marcus Webb. When does he want to meet? She was composing a response when her office door burst open. No knock, no warning. Gordon Harlan strode in like he owned the building, his face flushed with rage, and behind him 2 officers tried unsuccessfully to look like they weren't providing muscle. You think you're clever? Harlan's voice was loud enough to carry down the hallway. Calling in the AG? Getting some federal prosecutor to do your dirty work? All you've done is make this take longer. I've got 24 years of clean service. I've got commendations, I've got community support, I've got officers who'll testify that you've been hostile to law enforcement for years. Renee stood slowly, aware of the judges flanking her, aware of her assistant hovering in the doorway with security already on their phone. She kept her voice level, almost gentle. Chief Harlan, you're in my office without an appointment, accompanied by armed officers in what appears to be an attempt at intimidation. I'm going to ask you once to leave. If you refuse, you'll be escorted out, and I'll file a restraining order within the hour. Intimidation? Harlan laughed, harsh and bitter. You want to talk about intimidation? You've got the entire media calling me a racist thug. You've got protesters outside my house. My wife is getting death threats. My kids are being harassed at school. All because you couldn't handle a simple request to move from a bench. All because you assaulted me and then lied about it, Renee corrected. The media didn't make you hit me, Chief. The protesters didn't make you tell witnesses I attacked you. You did that yourself. In broad daylight, on camera. And now you're facing the consequences. Harlan took a step closer. Judge Washington moved to intercept him, and the temperature in the room spiked dangerously. You have no idea what you've started, Harlan said, his voice dropping to something more threatening than his earlier shouting. You think Davidson scares me? I've survived 3 mayors, 5 city managers, and more oversight committees than you've had hot meals. I know how this works. They'll investigate, they'll write a report, they'll recommend some reforms, and then everything goes back to normal because this city needs its police department a hell of a lot more than it needs some administrator with a grudge. That's where you're wrong, Judge Morrison said coldly. This isn't about what the city needs. It's about what the law requires. And the law requires that people who commit assault be prosecuted, regardless of their badge. Harlan's eyes flicked to Morrison, then back to Renee. You've turned this into a circus, a media spectacle. Whatever happened to handling things professionally, internally, like adults? You mean like the complaint process that's buried 47 excessive force claims? Renee let that land. Or the internal affairs investigations that always clear officers? Or the settlements with NDAs that sweep everything under the rug? That kind of professional internal handling? Something shifted in Harlan's expression, surprise maybe, or the beginning of fear. You've been digging. I've been doing my job, which includes oversight of judicial processes, which includes reviewing patterns in cases involving law enforcement, and the patterns I've found are damning. You're on thin ice, Dr. Caldwell. Harlan's voice hardened again. Making accusations without evidence, using your position to conduct a personal vendetta, that's grounds for removal. I've already filed the grievance. The board will review your fitness for office, and when they do, every questionable decision you've ever made will be scrutinized. I welcome that scrutiny. Renee moved around her desk, positioning herself directly in front of Harlan. Despite everything, despite the fear that wanted to make her step back, she held her ground. Because my record is clean. My decisions are documented and defensible. Can you say the same, Chief? For a long moment, they stood there. Renee with her bruised face and unbowed shoulders, Harlan with his rage and desperation barely contained. The officers behind him shifted uncomfortably. Security had arrived in the doorway, waiting for direction. This isn't over, Harlan finally said. No, it's not. But it will be, and when it is, you won't be wearing that badge. Renee gestured to the door. Now leave my office before I have you removed. Harlan left, his footsteps heavy with barely controlled fury. The officers followed, the door closed, and Renee discovered her hands were shaking. That was incredibly stupid and incredibly brave, Martinez said. That was necessary, Renee corrected. He needed to see that I won't be intimidated. And now we have witnesses to his attempt at intimidation, which Davidson will love. She was right about that. When she called Robert Chen to report the confrontation, he practically crowed with satisfaction. He just gave us a gift. Confronting you in your office, after you've already filed complaints about harassment, Davidson will add witness intimidation to the investigation. This gets better and better. But better didn't mean easier. The rest of the day brought a flood of developments, each one adding complexity to an already Byzantine situation. The police union held another press conference, this time featuring officers of color who spoke about Harlan's mentorship and support, trying to inoculate against charges of racism. The mayor's office released a statement supporting the special prosecutor's investigation, while also defending the department's overall integrity. And someone leaked to the media that Marcus Webb was cooperating with investigators, which meant Webb was now in danger, and the timeline for protecting him had just accelerated. Elena called at 3 p.m., her voice tight. Webb's house was vandalized last night. Someone spray-painted "rat" across his garage door. His wife is terrified and he's talking about backing out. Where is he now? Home. But he won't be safe there much longer. Word spreading through the department. Renee made a decision. Tell him to pack a bag. I'm getting him and his family into protective custody. You can do that? I can request it through Davidson's office. Give me 20 minutes. The call to Davidson's team went through a paralegal who sounded harried but competent. Yes, they'd been expecting witness protection requests. Yes, they could arrange safe housing for Detective Webb and his family. Yes, they understood the urgency. Could Dr. Caldwell facilitate initial contact? She could, and did, calling Webb directly. "Detective, I hear your home was vandalized." "Someone knows I'm talking to you." Webb's voice was strained. "My captain called me in this morning, asked if I was experiencing any unusual stress, and suggested I take some personal time. He's never been that solicitous before. They're trying to figure out what I know." "Then we need to move fast. The special prosecutor's office can arrange safe housing for you and your family. Somewhere outside Riverside, secure, monitored. You'd need to leave today." "And my job? My pension?" "Davidson will work that out. But right now, your safety is more important than your employment status." Renee softened her voice. "Marcus, they vandalized your house. Next time it might not just be spray paint." There was a long pause. She could hear voices in the background. His wife, probably, asking what was happening. "Okay," Webb finally said. "Tell me what to do." Within 2 hours, Marcus Webb and his family were in a hotel 40 miles outside Riverside, registered under assumed names and with security detail provided by the state police. His files, 3 banker's boxes full of documents, recordings, and notes, were in transit to Davidson's office. And the department was probably just starting to realize that one of their own had turned. Elena published her investigation that evening. The Riverside Independent's website crashed within minutes from traffic overload as people absorbed the documented pattern of misconduct spanning 2 decades. 47 complaints, 18 lawsuits, over $2 million in settlement money, names, dates, case numbers, everything laid out with the meticulous detail of someone who'd spent 3 years preparing for this moment. The public reaction was swift and fierce. Riverside's progressive reputation had always been a source of civic pride. Now that image cracked apart as people confronted evidence that their police department operated like departments in cities they'd congratulated themselves for being better than. Protest marches organized spontaneously. The city council chambers filled beyond capacity with residents demanding answers. And social media became a confessional as person after person shared their own experiences with Riverside PD. The traffic stops that felt like fishing expeditions, the aggressive responses to minor complaints, the sense that officers saw certain neighborhoods as enemy territory rather than communities to protect. Renee watched it unfold from her living room, her granddaughter Sarah curled up beside her. Isha had brought Sarah to stay for a few days, deciding that being together was safer than being separated. Sarah was supposed to be doing homework but kept glancing at the news coverage on Renee's tablet. "Grandma, why did that man hit you?" Renee set down the tablet and pulled Sarah closer. "Because he thought he could. Because he's used to people being afraid of him and doing what he says without question." "But you weren't afraid." "Oh, I was afraid. I'm still afraid sometimes. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you're scared." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then, "Mama said kids at school are saying mean things. That you're making trouble. That the police are good and you're lying." Renee felt a surge of anger at the idea of children parroting their parents' defenses of power, but she kept her voice calm. "Some people don't want to believe that people they trusted did bad things. It's easier to blame the person who tells the truth than to accept that the truth is hard. But you know what really happened, right? You saw the video." "I saw him hit you and then lie about it." Sarah's voice was small but certain. "That was wrong." "Yes, it was. And now a lot of people are working to make sure he faces consequences for that, and to fix the system that let him think he could get away with it." Aisha appeared in the doorway with 3 mugs of hot chocolate. "I thought we could use something comforting. It's going to be a long night." She was right. By 9 p.m., the mayor had called an emergency city council meeting. By 10, the police union was threatening a work slowdown if officers felt they were being unfairly targeted. By 11, Davidson's office had issued a statement that they'd received substantial documentary evidence and expected to present preliminary findings within 3 weeks. And at midnight, Renee's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize but somehow knew she had to answer. "Dr. Caldwell?" The voice was female, young, scared. My name is Tanya Richardson. I was one of the witnesses in the park. I saw everything that happened. Renee sat up, suddenly alert. Yes, Miss Richardson? I gave my contact information to police that day, but no one ever called me for a statement. I thought maybe they didn't need it since there was video. But then I saw the news tonight, saw how they're trying to discredit you, and I realized they're not going to call me. They don't want my statement because it contradicts their story. What exactly did you see? Everything. I was maybe 20 feet away sitting on the grass with my sketchbook. I heard Chief Harlan approach you. I heard him demand you move. I heard him say, "Know your place," and I saw him hit you. There was no ambiguity, no confusion. You didn't touch him, didn't threaten him, didn't do anything except refuse to give up your seat. Tanya's voice strengthened. And I've been carrying that around for days, feeling sick because I thought my witness statement didn't matter. But it does matter, doesn't it? It matters enormously. Renee grabbed a pen. Are you willing to make an official statement to the special prosecutor? That's why I'm calling. I need to know it will actually mean something, that I'm not just going to get buried like all those other cases in that reporter's article. James Davidson doesn't bury evidence, and your testimony corroborates the video and other witness accounts. Yes, Ms. Richardson, it will mean something. They talked for another 15 minutes, Renee taking detailed notes and promising to connect Tanya with Davidson's team in the morning. When they hung up, Renee felt another piece click into place. The video was damning, but videos could be argued over, could be claimed to lack context. A credible witness who saw everything and had no connection to either party? That was gold. Sleep came late and fitfully that night. Renee dreamed of standing in the park again, but this time when Harlan approached, she was surrounded by dozens of people. Marcus Jr., to Detective Webb, Tanya Richardson, Elena Cruz, all the unnamed victims from the settlements and buried complaints. In the dream, when Harlan raised his hand to strike, they all stepped forward as one, and his hand froze in midair, powerless against the weight of collective testimony. She woke to sunlight and the smell of Aisha making breakfast. Sarah was already at the kitchen table, working on homework with the focused intensity of someone trying to create normalcy in chaos. "Mom, you have about 50 missed calls," Aisha said, handing her coffee, including 3 from Judge Morrison marked urgent. Renee checked her phone and felt her stomach drop. The headline on the news app read, "Riverside Police Chief placed on administrative leave." She called Morrison immediately. "Tell me you saw the news," the judge said without preamble. "Just did. What happened?" Emergency City Council meeting went until 4 a.m. Okonkwo rallied enough votes to force the city manager's hand. Harlan's on paid leave pending the investigation. The union is losing their minds, threatening legal action, but it's done. It was a victory, but Renee felt no triumph. He's going to be even more dangerous now, cornered, nothing to lose. That's why Davidson is fast-tracking the investigation. He wants a grand jury impaneled within 2 weeks. Morrison paused. "Renee, this is really happening. We're actually going to hold him accountable. We're going to try, but we haven't won yet." The next 2 weeks became a blur of activity. Davidson's team worked with focused intensity, interviewing witnesses, reviewing Webb's files, cross-referencing Elena's documentation with official records. The grand jury was impaneled with members drawn from outside Riverside to avoid local bias, and the city itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between hope and fear about what would emerge. Renee continued her regular duties while navigating the constant media attention. She reviewed cases with extra care, knowing every decision would be scrutinized. She met with Davidson's team 3 times to provide her own detailed account, to identify which of Webb's files connected to cases she'd overseen, to help build a comprehensive picture of how the protective machinery operated. The harassment continued, but evolved. No more officers at her door, too obvious after Harlan's office confrontation. Instead, it became subtler, cars that followed her for a few blocks before turning away, hang-up calls at odd hours, social media accounts that posted her home address and suggested she'd brought this on herself. Robert Chen documented everything and filed supplemental complaints, building a harassment case that would support the larger investigation. Marcus Webb's testimony proved devastating. In a sealed session with the grand jury, he laid out 5 years of compromised investigations, including the case involving his nephew. He provided audio recordings of supervisors telling him what conclusions to reach. He showed emails where evidence was selectively edited. He named names, not just Harlan, but captains and lieutenants who'd participated in the cover-ups, officials who'd pressured investigators, union reps who'd threatened witnesses. Elena's follow-up articles kept the pressure on, each one revealing another layer of institutional dysfunction. The city's insurance carrier announced they were reviewing their coverage of law enforcement liabilities. 3 city council members who'd consistently voted down oversight measures suddenly discovered they supported reform. And the community that had prided itself on progressive values confronted the uncomfortable truth that those values had been more aspirational than actual. Through it all, Renee maintained her focus on the larger goal. This wasn't about revenge against Harlan, though she'd be lying if she said she didn't want to see him held accountable. It was about breaking the system that had enabled him, about creating mechanisms that would prevent the next Harlan from operating with impunity, about proving that power without accountability was just tyranny with better PR. The grand jury deliberated for 3 days. Renee tried to work but found herself constantly checking her phone, waiting for word. When the call finally came, it was Davidson himself. Dr. Caldwell, the grand jury has returned indictments. Chief Harlan is being charged with assault and battery, filing a false police report, and witness intimidation. Additionally, we're bringing charges against Captain Thomas Reynolds for obstruction of justice and evidence tampering, and Lieutenant Sarah Chen for conspiracy to obstruct justice. Renee closed her eyes, feeling something release in her chest. When will the arrests happen? County sheriffs are executing warrants now. We're using county rather than city police to avoid any conflicts. Harlan will be processed like any other defendant. Booking, bail hearing, the works. And Detective Webb? Protected. His testimony was crucial. We're negotiating an immunity agreement in exchange for his cooperation at trial. Davidson paused. Dr. Caldwell, I want you to know, this case opened doors to deeper problems. We're now investigating the entire internal affairs process, looking at patterns in how complaints are handled, examining the financial relationships between city officials and the police union. What you started by refusing to stay quiet is going to result in real structural change. That's all I wanted. Renee's voice caught slightly. Thank you for taking this seriously. Thank you for having the courage to come forward. Not everyone would have. The arrests made national news. Footage of Gordon Harlan being led out of his house in handcuffs, of him being processed at the county jail, of him standing before a judge for a bail hearing. It became the visual representation of accountability that people had demanded. The police union denounced it as a witch hunt. Harlan's attorney called it politically motivated prosecution. Supporters rallied outside the courthouse, but the evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, and public opinion had shifted too far to ignore. Bail was set at $500,000. Harlan made it, but he emerged from jail looking diminished, the swagger gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed stress of someone who'd just discovered he wasn't untouchable after all. The city council voted 5-2 to establish the Civilian Oversight Board with real power, subpoena authority, independent investigators, the ability to recommend charges. Margaret Okonkwo was named chair. The board's first act was to review every closed internal affairs case from the past 10 years. And on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the indictments, Renee received a letter from the Office of Professional Responsibility, clearing her of all allegations raised in the police union's fitness complaint. The investigation had found no evidence of bias, no pattern of inappropriate decisions, no basis for questioning her competence. The grievance was dismissed with prejudice. She read the letter twice, then set it down and looked at a reflection in her office window. The bruises had faded weeks ago, leaving no visible mark. But the invisible ones, the trauma of that morning in the park, the stress of everything that followed, those would take longer to heal. Her phone buzzed with a text from Aisha. Sarah wants to know if you can come to her school for career day. She wants to tell everyone about how her grandma fights for justice. Renee smiled, feeling tears prick her eyes. This was what it had all been for. Not just punishing Harlan or reforming the department, but showing Sarah and kids like her that power could be challenged, that courage mattered, that one person standing up could catalyze change. She texted back, "I'd be honored." Judge Morrison appeared in her doorway. The trial date just got set. 6 months from now. Davidson's team thinks it'll take 2 weeks to present the full case. Good. Renee gestured to the guest chair. Patricia, I want to thank you for standing with me from the beginning, for filing that petition, for never making me feel like I was crazy for pursuing this. Morrison waved it off. You made it easy. You were right, and you had the evidence. All I did was make sure the system worked the way it's supposed to. That's more than most people do. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Two women who'd spent decades working within a system that often frustrated them, sometimes betrayed them, but still occasionally rewarded the belief that it could be made better. What happens now? Morrison finally asked. After the trial? After the reforms? After everything settles? What's next for you? Renee considered the question. Part of her wanted to return to quiet competence, to let someone else carry the banner while she went back to reviewing cases and managing administrative details. But another part, the part that had been forged in fire over the past month, knew that was no longer possible. I think I'm going to write a book, she said, about institutional accountability, about how systems protect themselves, about what it takes to break through that protection. Maybe it helps other people facing similar fights. Maybe it just helps me process what happened. Either way, the story needs to be told. It does, Morrison agreed. And you're the one to tell it. Later that evening, Renee sat in Riverside Park on the same bench where Gordon Harlan had struck her. The park had become something of a pilgrimage site, people leaving flowers and notes of support, though the city crews cleared them away each night. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Around her, families played, joggers ran. Life continued in all its messy, complicated beauty. This park had been a place of trauma. Now she was reclaiming it, refusing to let that trauma have the final word. Her phone rang. Elena Cruz. I'm at the park, Renee said. The bench. I know, I can see you. Look left. Renee turned to find Elena walking toward her, camera in hand. The reporter sat down beside her without asking permission. I'm writing a follow-up piece, Elena said, about what happens after the viral moment, after the indictments, when the cameras move on but the work continues. Want to talk about it? What do you want to know? How you're doing, really doing, not the public statement version, the truth. Renee thought about that. How was she doing? The nightmares had lessened but hadn't stopped. She still flinched sometimes when men approached her suddenly. She still felt the ghost of Harlan's hand against her face. But alongside the trauma was something else, a fierce satisfaction, a sense of having stood at a crossroads and chosen the harder but necessary path. I'm doing, she said finally. Some days are better than others, but I wake up every morning knowing I did the right thing, and that helps. Do you regret any of it? The publicity, the stress, the toll it's taken? I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the system is so broken that it took a public assault to force accountability. I regret every victim who came before me and didn't get justice because they didn't have my resources or platform. Renee paused. But I don't regret fighting. And I won't stop fighting, even after the trial, even after Harlan faces consequences. Because the real work, fixing the culture, changing the structures, ensuring this doesn't happen again, that work is just beginning. Elena typed notes on her phone. One more question. What would you say to other people who've experienced police misconduct but are afraid to come forward? Renee looked out at the park, at the place where everything had changed. I'd say I understand the fear. I'd say the system is designed to make you doubt yourself, to make you think you're powerless, to convince you that speaking up will only make things worse. And I'd say that all of that is true, and you should come forward anyway. Because silence only protects power. Truth is the only weapon we have that they can't take away. Document everything. Find allies. Use whatever platform you have. And know that every person who speaks up makes it easier for the next person to do the same. She turned to Elena. You helped make that possible, you know. Your investigation, your refusal to let this story die. That mattered. That's what journalism is supposed to do. And what you did is what justice is supposed to do, Elena replied. Hold people accountable regardless of their power. They sat together as darkness fell over the park. Two women who'd chosen to fight when staying quiet would have been easier, safer, more comfortable. Around them, Riverside slowly came to terms with what it had been and what it might become if enough people refused to accept the gap between its values and its reality. The fight wasn't over. The trial would be brutal. The resistance would continue. And there would be setbacks, compromises, moments when progress felt impossible. But sitting on that bench where Gordon Harlan had tried to assert dominance through violence, Renee Caldwell felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Not the naive hope that everything would automatically get better, but the hard-won hope that came from seeing a system bend toward accountability when enough pressure was applied in the right places. The woman who'd been struck had struck back. Not with violence, but with truth, documentation, and an unshakable refusal to let power escape its obligations. And the walls that had protected corrupt officers for decades were finally starting to crack. 6 months felt like both an eternity and an instant. The trial began on a Monday in early spring, when Riverside's carefully cultivated trees bloomed with white and pink flowers that seemed almost obscene in their beauty given what was about to unfold inside the century-old courthouse. Renee arrived early, accompanied by Robert Chen and flanked by Aisha and Judge Morrison. The crowd outside was massive, supporters holding signs that read "Justice for Dr. Caldwell" and "End Police Brutality," counter-protesters with thin blue line flags shouting about supporting law enforcement, and enough media to turn the courthouse steps into a forest of cameras and microphones. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. James Davidson sat at the prosecution table with 2 assistants, reviewing notes with the focused calm of someone who'd done this dozens of times. Across the aisle, Gordon Harlan sat with his defense team, 3 high-priced attorneys from a firm that specialized in defending law enforcement. Harlan looked older than he had 6 months ago, the stress carving new lines around his mouth and eyes, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight he'd lost. Their eyes met once. Renee held his gaze until he looked away. Judge Christopher Warren, brought in from another district to avoid any appearance of local bias, took the bench and brought the court to order. He was in his late 60s, with a reputation for running a tight courtroom and zero tolerance for theatrics from either side. "The state versus Gordon James Harlan," he announced. "Charges of assault and battery, filing a false police report, and witness intimidation. Mr. Davidson, your opening statement." Davidson rose, and Renee was struck again by how unassuming he appeared. Average height, graying hair, a slight paunch that suggested he spent more time reading case files than working out. But when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about power and accountability. Specifically, it's about what happens when someone with power believes they're above accountability." On June 15th of last year, Police Chief Gordon Harlan approached Dr. Renee Caldwell in a public park and ordered her to surrender a bench she was lawfully occupying. When she refused, he became verbally aggressive, made racially charged comments, and then struck her with enough force to split her lip and cause substantial bruising. Then, and this is crucial, he lied about it. He told witnesses that Dr. Caldwell had attacked him, that he'd acted in self-defense. He used his authority as a police chief to intimidate witnesses and try to control the narrative. Davidson moved closer to the jury box. "Over the next 2 weeks, you're going to see video evidence of the assault. You're going to hear from multiple witnesses who saw exactly what happened. You're going to see medical documentation of Dr. Caldwell's injuries. And you're going to hear testimony about a pattern of behavior by Chief Harlan that made him believe he could commit this crime in broad daylight and face no consequences. By the end of this trial, you'll understand that this isn't about one bad decision in a moment of stress. This is about a man who spent 24 years learning that his badge made him untouchable, and who finally encountered someone who refused to be intimidated." The defense attorney, Margaret Hastings, a woman known for aggressive cross-examination and appeals to jury sympathy, stood for her response. "What Mr. Davidson just described sounds terrible," she began, "but it's not what happened. What actually happened is that Chief Harlan, on his day off, approached a woman who was acting suspiciously in a park where there had been recent reports of drug activity. He identified himself as a police officer and asked her to move so he could monitor the area. Dr. Caldwell became belligerent and confrontational. When Chief Harlan attempted to de-escalate the situation, she lunged at him, and he defended himself with minimal force. The so-called racial comments were misheard or misinterpreted. The injury to Dr. Caldwell's face was incidental, the result of her own aggressive actions. Hastings paused, letting that version settle. You're going to hear a lot about Chief Harlan's past, about complaints and investigations that are completely irrelevant to what happened that day. The prosecution wants you to convict him based on character assassination, not facts. But the facts will show that Chief Harlan acted reasonably in a difficult situation, and that Dr. Caldwell has turned a routine law enforcement interaction into a crusade that's destroyed a good man's career and reputation. It was masterfully done. The alternative narrative delivered with conviction, the seeds of doubt planted carefully. Renee felt a twist of anxiety. Juries were unpredictable. What seemed obvious on video could be argued into ambiguity by a skilled attorney. The first witness was Tanya Richardson, the artist who'd been sketching in the park. She took the stand nervously, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her jacket. Davidson walked her through her account with patient questioning. Ms. Richardson, where were you sitting in relation to Dr. Caldwell and Chief Harlan? About 20 feet away. I was on the grass sketching the fountain. Did you see Chief Harlan approach Dr. Caldwell? Yes. He walked up to her bench and said something. I couldn't hear it at first, but then his voice got louder. What did you hear him say? He said, "You need to move." Dr. Caldwell said there were other benches available. Then he got more aggressive. He said something like, "You people always talking about rights and know your place." Did Dr. Caldwell do anything physically aggressive toward Chief Harlan? No, she was just sitting there. She didn't even stand up until after he hit her. And you saw him hit her? Yes, it was fast but clear. He slapped her across the face hard enough that her head snapped to the side. I could hear it from where I was sitting. Davidson showed her the video, asking her to confirm the sequence of events. Tanya identified herself in the background of the footage, visible as a figure on the grass. When Hastings cross-examined, she went after Tanya's perception and potential bias. Ms. Richardson, you said you were sketching. Doesn't that require you to focus on your work rather than watching other people? I was sketching the fountain, but I look up regularly to observe details. That's how sketching works. You've become quite active on social media supporting Dr. Caldwell, haven't you? Posting about police reform, attending protests? After what I witnessed, yes. I felt compelled to speak up. So you have a personal investment in seeing Chief Harlan convicted? I have a personal investment in telling the truth about what I saw. It went like that for an hour. Hastings trying to undermine Tanya's credibility, Tanya holding firm. When she finally stepped down, she looked exhausted but satisfied. The parade of witnesses continued. The young mother who'd recognized Renee and spoken to her minutes before Harlan arrived. The jogger who'd stopped when he sensed trouble. The Tai Chi instructor whose class had witnessed everything. Each one corroborating the same sequence of events: unprovoked approach, escalating aggression, assault, false claims. When Dr. Sarah Chen took the stand to testify about Renee's injuries, she brought enlarged photos that made several jurors wince. The bruising was extensive and consistent with a forceful blow. The split lip required careful monitoring to prevent infection. These are not the kind of injuries you sustain from someone defending themselves against your attack. These are the injuries of someone who was struck without warning or ability to protect themselves. Detective Marcus Webb's testimony came on the third day, and the courtroom atmosphere shifted the moment he was sworn in. This was a police officer testifying against his own chief, and everyone felt the weight of that betrayal, or courage, depending on your perspective. Davidson handled him carefully, establishing his credentials and years of service before moving to the core testimony. Detective Webb, did you investigate complaints against Chief Harlan? Not directly against him, no, but I investigated several cases involving officers under his direct command. And how did those investigations proceed? Webb's voice was steady, but his discomfort was visible. I was given guidance on what conclusions were expected, not explicit orders, but strong suggestions about what findings would be acceptable. Who provided this guidance? Captain Reynolds and Lieutenant Chen primarily, sometimes Chief Harlan directly. Can you give us an example? Webb described the case of a young man tased during a traffic stop, the witness statements that suggested excessive force, and the pressure he'd received to conclude the force was justified. He explained how evidence had been selectively included in his reports, how witnesses who contradicted the official narrative were deemed unreliable, how the entire process was designed to protect officers rather than find truth. "Why did you participate in this?" Davidson asked. Webb's jaw tightened. "Because Chief Harlan had leverage over me. 5 years ago, he assaulted my nephew during a traffic stop. When my family tried to pursue charges, Harlan made it clear that he could either help us or destroy us. We chose survival over justice, and I've regretted it every day since." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Hastings objected to the relevance, but Judge Warren allowed it as establishing pattern of behavior and witness intimidation. When Hastings cross-examined, she went for the jugular. "Detective Webb, isn't it true that you're testifying in exchange for immunity from prosecution for your own crimes?" "Yes." "So you're saving yourself by accusing others?" "I'm telling the truth about a corrupt system. Whether that saves me or not is up to the prosecutor and the judge. But everything I've testified to is documented and verifiable." "You participated in covering up police misconduct for 5 years. Why should this jury believe anything you say?" Webb met her eyes. "Because I brought the receipts. Every conversation I described, I have recordings or emails. Every investigation I mentioned, I have the original notes and the edited versions. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm providing evidence that speaks for itself." Davidson's redirect was brief but effective, entering into evidence the documents Webb referenced, hundreds of pages that showed systematic manipulation of investigations. On the 5th day, Renee herself took the stand. She'd prepared for this, had gone over her testimony with Davidson a dozen times, but nothing quite prepared her for the feeling of sitting in that chair with the courtroom's attention focused entirely on her. She could see Sarah in the gallery, sitting between Aisha and Judge Morrison, and drew strength from her granddaughter's steady gaze. Davidson led her through the events of June 15th with careful attention to detail. Renee described arriving at the park, choosing the bench, reviewing case files. She recounted Harlan's approach, his demands, his escalating aggression. "When he said, 'Know your place,' what did you understand that to mean?" "I understood it as a racial comment, a statement that I, as a black woman, should defer to him, a white man in authority. It was about power and race and his expectation that I would submit without question." "What did you do after he struck you?" "I gathered my papers and left. I was bleeding, in pain, and frightened that if I stayed, the situation would escalate further." "Why didn't you call the police?" "He was the police. Who was I going to call? His own department? The same department that had protected him for 2 decades while he committed similar acts?" Davidson showed her the medical photos. "Can you describe the physical impact of this assault?" "The immediate pain, the swelling, the difficulty eating or speaking for days afterward. But the deeper impact was psychological. I've spent my entire career in positions of authority, in spaces where I had to prove I belonged. In one moment, Chief Harlan stripped away all of that, reduced me to just another black woman who needed to know her place. The physical wounds healed, that violation of dignity, that reminder that no amount of achievement makes you safe from that kind of violence. That takes longer." When Hastings began her cross-examination, Renee braced herself. "Dr. Caldwell, you've had disagreements with the Riverside Police Department before, haven't you?" "I've reviewed cases involving RPD officers and made recommendations that the department didn't always agree with. That's part of my job." "You've been described as hostile to law enforcement by people who don't like oversight. I've also been described as fair and rigorous by people who value accountability. Isn't it true that you've been investigating Chief Harlan's record for months before this incident?" "I review patterns in cases as part of my administrative duties. That's not investigating, that's oversight." "So you admit you had a professional interest in Chief Harlan before he allegedly assaulted you?" "I had a professional interest in ensuring the justice system operates fairly. Chief Harlan's record of complaints was relevant to that interest." Hastings tried various approaches, suggesting Renee had been confrontational, that she'd escalated the situation, that she was using her position to settle a grudge. But Renee had spent 3 decades in courtrooms and wasn't easily rattled. She answered each question with calm precision, refusing to be drawn into defensive anger. The turning point came when Hastings made a tactical error. "Doctor, Caldwell, isn't it convenient that this alleged assault happened to give you exactly the ammunition you needed to go after Chief Harlan's department? Renee looked at her for a long moment. Ma'am, I would have preferred not to be assaulted. I would have preferred that the system I've devoted my life to serving actually worked without requiring victims to become crusaders. But since Chief Harlan decided to hit me in broad daylight and then lie about it, yes, I've used every tool at my disposal to ensure he faces consequences. That's not convenient. That's necessary. The jury's expression suggested the question had backfired badly. After 9 days of testimony, both sides rested. Closing arguments took half a day. Davidson summarizing the overwhelming evidence of Harlan's guilt, Hastings making a last appeal to reasonable doubt, and police officer sympathy. Judge Warren instructed the jury on the law, and they retired to deliberate. The wait was excruciating. Renee returned to her office, trying to work but finding herself staring at her computer screen without processing anything. Elena called for updates. Sarah sent encouraging texts. Judge Morrison stopped by with coffee and company, the two women sitting in companionable silence, punctuated by occasional speculation about how long deliberations might take. After 6 hours, the jury sent out a note asking to review the park video again. After 8 hours, they requested Detective Webb's documentation. After 11 hours, they broke for the night. Renee went home and couldn't sleep. She stood at her window looking out at her quiet street, thinking about all the people whose lives had intersected with this case. Marcus Jr., building a future from trauma. Marcus Sr., trying to reclaim integrity. Tanya and the other witnesses who'd chosen courage over comfort. Elena, whose journalism had exposed what institutions tried to hide. And Gordon Harlan, whose casual violence in a park had set in motion his own downfall. The jury reconvened at 9 a.m. At 2:15 p.m., they sent word they'd reached a verdict. The courtroom filled again, the same crowd that had attended the trial's opening now returning to witness its conclusion. Renee sat at the prosecution table, hands folded to hide their trembling, as the jury filed in. She searched their faces for clues but found only the careful neutrality of people who'd made a difficult decision. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Warren asked. The forewoman, a middle-aged black woman who'd been a teacher before retiring, stood. "We have, Your Honor." "On the charge of assault and battery, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Judge Warren's gavel cracked like thunder, demanding order. Renee felt Aisha's hand grip her shoulder, felt tears she'd been holding back for months finally break free. "On the charge of filing a false police report, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of witness intimidation, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." Harlan's head dropped. His attorneys immediately began conferring, already planning appeals. But in that moment, the verdict stood as a singular statement. Powerful men could be held accountable when the evidence was overwhelming and the system functioned as designed. Judge Warren set sentencing for 3 weeks out and remanded Harlan to custody pending evaluation. As sheriff's deputies led him away in handcuffs, Harlan looked at Renee one final time. She couldn't read his expression, rage, regret, disbelief, but she held his gaze until he disappeared through the door. Outside the courthouse, Davidson gave a brief statement to the press. "Today's verdict represents a victory for justice and accountability. Dr. Caldwell had the courage to stand up against abuse of power, and a jury of Chief Harlan's peers found him guilty on all counts. This sends a clear message that no one is above the law." When Renee stepped up to the microphones, she spoke with the same calm that had carried her through months of harassment and intimidation. "This verdict isn't just about me. It's about every person who's been brutalized by those who are supposed to protect them. It's about every complaint that was ignored, every witness who was intimidated, every victim who was silenced. Today, 12 citizens said enough. Now the real work begins, ensuring the systems that enabled Chief Harlan are dismantled and rebuilt to serve justice rather than protect power." The questions came rapid fire, but Renee answered only a few before stepping back. This wasn't about savoring victory. It was about acknowledging that accountability had functioned and using that momentum to push for deeper change. 3 weeks later, sentencing brought closure. Judge Warren sentenced Harlan to 4 years in state prison, with credit for time served and possibility of parole after 2 years. It wasn't the maximum sentence, but it was substantial enough to satisfy Renee's sense that justice had been served. But the victory extended beyond Harlan's conviction. In the months following the verdict, the Civilian Oversight Board investigated and substantiated complaints in 6 additional cases involving officers under Harlan's command. 3 officers were fired, 2 resigned, and Detective Marcus Webb, having fully cooperated with all investigations, was allowed to retire with his pension intact and his integrity restored. The City Council, facing massive public pressure and the threat of federal intervention, agreed to a consent decree requiring comprehensive police reform. Training protocols were overhauled. The complaint process was redesigned with independent investigators. Body cameras became mandatory, and a special prosecutor system was established for all cases involving law enforcement, ensuring local political relationships couldn't compromise justice. Elena Cruz won a Regional Journalism Award for her investigation, which had expanded into a book documenting police accountability failures across multiple jurisdictions. Marcus Webb Jr. graduated pre-law with honors and was accepted to 3 top law schools, choosing the one with the strongest civil rights program. And Renee returned to her work with a new understanding of what oversight meant. The assault had changed her, had shown her that the systems she'd trusted to function fairly often only did so when forced. She became more aggressive in her administrative duties, more willing to challenge departments and demand transparency, more insistent that accountability wasn't optional. On the anniversary of the assault, she returned to Riverside Park. The city had installed a small plaque on her bench, not specifically referencing the incident, but marking it as a site where one person's courage catalyzed systemic change. She ran her fingers over the engraved letters, thinking about the journey from violence to verdict to reformation. Sarah joined her, now 10 years old and carrying a social studies project about civic responsibility. "My teacher said, 'You're a hero, Grandma.'" Renee smiled. "I'm someone who refused to accept injustice. There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Heroes are special. What I did, anyone can do. Anyone with courage and resources and willingness to fight. That's not heroism, that's citizenship." They sat together on the bench, grandmother and granddaughter, as park life swirled around them. A young woman jogged past, nodding at Renee in recognition. A family spread a picnic blanket on the grass. The fountain splashed and sparkled in afternoon sunlight. This park had been a site of trauma, a place where Renee had been brutalized and diminished, but she'd taken it back, had transformed its meaning through persistence and refusal to be silenced. Now it was a place of victory, a reminder that power could be challenged and accountability could be won. Her phone buzzed with a text from Judge Morrison. "City Council just approved funding for a new justice reform center. They want to name it after you." Renee typed back, "Name it after Marcus Webb Jr. Let it be a reminder that victims can become advocates and systems can be changed." That evening, she sat at her desk working on the book she'd promised herself she'd write. The manuscript was half finished, chapters alternating between narrative of the assault and analysis of institutional dysfunction. It was harder to write than she'd expected, forcing her to relive trauma while maintaining analytical distance, but she pushed through because the story needed telling. The chapter she was working on focused on the moment of decision, that instant when she could have taken the settlement, stepped back, chosen self-preservation over systemic change. She wrote about the calculation every victim makes, weighing personal cost against potential impact, trying to decide if fighting is worth the price. She wrote, "Power protects itself through fear, through making the cost of resistance appear greater than the cost of submission. But what power can't account for is the moment when someone decides that dignity matters more than safety, that truth matters more than comfort, that the possibility of change matters more than the certainty of peace. That moment of decision, when you choose to fight knowing the odds, knowing the cost, knowing you might lose, that's when individual courage becomes collective possibility." A knock at her door interrupted her writing. Aisha stood there with a bottle of wine and a knowing smile. "You've been working for 6 hours. Time to stop and breathe." They moved to the living room, pouring wine and settling into the comfortable silence of family. Sarah was asleep upstairs, exhausted from her school day. The house was quiet, peaceful, secure in a way that Renee no longer took for granted. Are you okay? Aisha asked finally. Really okay? Renee considered the question. Was she okay? The nightmares had mostly stopped. The hypervigilance had lessened. The bruises had faded months ago. But the experience had changed her in ways both obvious and subtle, had shown her both the fragility of safety and the power of resistance. I'm okay, she said. Not the same as before, but okay. Maybe better than before, actually. I understand now what I'm capable of when pushed. I understand how systems work and how they can be made to work better. I understand that change is possible if you're willing to pay the price for it. And was it worth it? The price you paid? Renee thought about everything, the assault, the harassment, the stress, the fear, the months of uncertainty. She thought about the verdict, the reforms, the precedent set, the message sent. Yes, she said simply. It was worth it. They talked late into the night, mother and daughter, about everything and nothing. About Sarah's growing awareness of injustice and how to nurture that without overwhelming her. About Aisha's own work as a social worker and how Renee's case had affected her client's willingness to report abuse. About the future and what came next. When Aisha finally left, Renee stood at her window looking out at Riverside sleeping under a canopy of stars. Somewhere in this city, Gordon Harlan sat in a prison cell, his career destroyed, his reputation shattered, his freedom constrained. Somewhere else, Marcus Webb slept peacefully for the first time in 5 years, no longer carrying the weight of compromised integrity. Elena Cruz was probably still working, chasing the next story, fighting the next fight. And hundreds of nameless people who'd filed complaints and been ignored now had a system that might actually listen. The work wasn't finished. Systems resisted change, and victories could be reversed if vigilance lapsed. But something fundamental had shifted in Riverside, a crack in the wall that protected power from accountability. Renee returned to her manuscript, reading over what she'd written, adding a final thought. Justice delayed is justice denied, they say. But justice pursued even at great personal cost, even against overwhelming odds, even when the outcome is uncertain. That's the only justice worth having. Because the alternative is silence, and silence only serves power. The moment we speak truth, document abuse, refuse to accept injustice as inevitable, that's the moment change becomes possible. She saved the file and closed her laptop, feeling the satisfaction of work well done and work still to do. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be appeals to navigate, reforms to protect, skeptics to convince. But tonight, Renee allowed herself to feel what she'd earned through months of courage and persistence. Peace. Not the peace of avoidance or submission, but the peace of knowing she'd stood at a crossroads and chosen the harder path. The peace of seeing systemic change emerge from personal trauma. The peace of proving that one woman refusing to know her place could shake the foundations of institutional power. Gordon Harlan had wanted to put her in her place with violence and lies. Instead, he'd awakened something fiercer, a determination to ensure that no one else would have to endure what she had, and a commitment to building systems that protected the vulnerable rather than the powerful. The woman on the bench had become the architect of reform, and Riverside would never be the same